We're here to listen, but we can't do it if we're getting yelled at, and we need to have control of the meeting. So you can speak your mind, we can speak ours, but what we'd really like to do is have these kids present their accomplishments because they're extraordinary. And if we can agree to do that together, we can move on with the meeting and you can be heard. So with that in mind, we're going to put a pin in the budget discussion so that these wonderful kids can present their amazing accomplishments projects.
So with that said, I'll skip ahead in the agenda to the part of the superintendent's report where I get to introduce our K-12 science coordinator, Mr. Ray Laverso. He is going to be able to tell us a little bit about the process that led to a wonderful recognition of having 4 Regeneron semifinalists and finalists from our school district. We're so very proud of them. We know that this is not just the work that they did this year, but this is the culmination of work that literally starts in middle school and tremendous amount of effort, hundreds and thousands of hours of work that allows them to win this incredibly prestigious competition. So, Mr. Laverso, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Dr. Rogers, members of the Board of Education, and our administration. So Albert Einstein has said that imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited, but imagination encircles the world. And the students we're honoring tonight have earned their accolades by hard work, yes. They've learned a lot over the past 4 years. However, they also had the audacity to imagine ways in which that knowledge might be useful to the world. I've worked in 3 different school districts, and I've never seen the level of dedication and support we have in Syosset. Semifinalists for Regeneron Student Talent Search are very rare. Not only do we have 2 semifinalists, we have 2 finalists. Our high school is so proud of these students, and I know you are as well. The journey from 9th grade research to 12th grade Regeneron Scholar is really, really difficult, and our students are guided by their teachers every step of the way, and they are guided with the help of our research facilitator as well, Ms. Veronica Aid, and I'm very happy and honored to bring Ms. Aid up to introduce to you our Regeneron Scholars.
Good evening. I could stand here and tell you what I usually say, which is this is the Nobel Prize of high school research, and I still firmly believe that. But I wanted to take a minute and just tell you that the perseverance of these students over the past 4 years has blown my mind, more so than any other senior class, just because of what they've had to go through. And the fact that not only these 4 students that you'll hear tonight, but the 17 seniors that have made it from 9th grade research and have continued on and found ways to continue their research from home. Some students were not even in the building at all last year, which you know. They were able to continue, find mentors, correspond with them, and then 3 of our students here actually were able to persevere and go into a lab this past summer and get some research completed. It blows my mind every day to talk to the phenomenal young students in our program, but like I said, more so than ever this year they stand out. So I'd like to introduce to you 2 of our 300 nationwide scholars, Sabrina Chen and Eric Wang. And then our 2 finalists, and there are 40 in the entire nation. These students are Ethan Chu and Rohan Gotra.
Good evening. My name is Sabrina Chen, and my project was titled Negative Charges at T168, S169, and/or S170 of gene ECM11 promotes wild-type meiotic progression and synapsis in meiotic Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Complicated, yes, but I'll try to make it sound as simple as possible. So, meiosis is one of the most important steps of any organism's reproduction, and it accounts for a lot of the genetic diversity and the diversity that we see in organisms around the entire world. Unfortunately, meiotic aneuploidy, or the deviation from the normal number of chromosomes, constitutes over 50% of miscarriages that we see in the first trimester of pregnancy. Thus, because of this statistic, I was inspired to investigate meiosis as well as genetics in Saccharomyces cerevisiae, more commonly referred to as Baker's yeast. Recombination is the first step in meiosis in a lot of organisms, and it occurs between homologous chromosomes in order to form covalent linkages and allow for more genetic diversity. It first forms through crossover formation, initiated by the creation of double-stranded breaks, and eventually leads to these covalent linkages that allow our homologs to exchange genetic material. However, one of the intermediate structures in this process is called the synaptonemal complex, or SC, which is formed by first the condensation of sister chromatids in each chromosome into the axial elements, as shown in red in the figure, and eventually the connection of these axial elements by the central element, as shown in green. The synaptonemal complex is one of the most important structures that allows for the covalent linkages. However, the protein of interest in this project was ECM11, which is a critical component of the SC by forming the central region, as shown by when there lacks ECM11, there lacks any of the green coloring or the central elements that link the homologs. In my study specifically, I investigated the phosphorylation, or the addition of two negative charges, and how this may affect meiotic progression as well as SC formation. And the results I found were that, well, when the yeast cells were mutated to have no negative charges or display an alanine amino acid, the yeast cells displayed a delayed meiotic progression as well as crossover formation and SC formation, versus when these genes were mutated to have one negative charge, it displayed a more wild type or standard formation. Thus, considering that Saccharomyces cerevisiae is a model organism, or an organism with similar genetic characteristics to humans, investigating this gene as well as meiosis and overall meiotic recombination is quite imperative to understanding sexual reproduction and overall helping us better understand genetic disorders, whether that be in developing more effective treatments such as gene therapy or genetic modification mechanisms, or overall just forming a better understanding of how we can approach these diseases. In the long run, we need further studies beyond just studying yeast, but in more human studies as well. Thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Eric Huang, and my research project was on the compliant and aerodynamic characteristics of a 3D printed variable camber aircraft wing. So, how do airplanes generate lift? As air flows above and below the wing, a pressure differential is created, generating lift. There are several ways to increase lift while keeping the airspeed constant: increasing the angle of attack, adding flaps to the wing, and increasing the camber of the wing. You can see those animations here. So what is camber? It's formally defined as the convexity of the airfoil, or in other words, how much the airfoil occurs. For a wing with no camber, that will produce low lift and low drag, while with a wing with high camber, that will produce high lift and high drag. So for a traditional flap design, as the flap angle increases, the lift and drag will increase. You can also see that as the flap is deployed, the center of lift shifts backwards, which can cause a pitching moment, which can increase the chance of stalling and crashing. So let's compare this with a variable camber wing design. Similarly, as the wing camber increases, the lift and drag will increase. In addition, hypothetically, the lift or the center of lift will not shift as the camber changes. This leads to my hypotheses. The main objective was to determine whether or not I can actually design a wing that can alter its camber and achieve different levels of lift and drag. And additionally, my second objective was to see if the center of lift will shift, as previously mentioned. If these goals can be achieved, then I can potentially create a wing that is more efficient than the traditional aircraft flap design. As you can see, for a flap design, you can see that there's a lot of drag produced since the flap is segmented and not continuous, while for the variable camber wing, you can see that it's more streamlined, reducing wasted drag. So there were several main procedures throughout the project. First was designing the wing, followed by computational software, which included finite element analysis, or FEA, and computational fluid dynamics, or CFD. FEA pertains to stress simulations, while CFD refers to simulating airflow over the wing. So for the wing design, you can see that the wing is very thin, or the wing skin is very thin, which allows for the wing to be very flexible and camber. And it was found that as more force was applied to the wing, the camber increases as expected. For the airflow simulation results, as the wing camber increased, the lift and drag increased, while the efficiency, which was calculated by dividing lift and drag, decreased. In summary, I was able to design a wing that can camber and achieve different levels of lift. And although one of my initial hypotheses about the shift and center of lift was incorrect, future research can be done to further validate my results. Thank you.
Good evening. My project is on developing a self-formed ectodermal autonomous multi-zone organoid model using human stem cells to examine the effect of doxycycline treatment on uveal melanoma. Specifically, to give a brief synopsis and an introduction to my research, while volunteering at Nassau University Medical Center, a community hospital within Nassau County, there was a woman who couldn't afford treatments for her son's cancer, and that really shocked me. So what I sought to do was develop a more economical treatment to cancer through an antibiotic called doxycycline. And when I was at the library browsing some articles, some medical journals on abdominal pain, I found that someone ripped out the appendix. But that wasn't the most notable thing. The most notable thing was a specific article that talked about how doxycycline had previously been used to treat breast cancer, and it was really effective and economical in doing so. So specifically within my project, uveal melanoma is the specific cancer that I sought to investigate the effects of doxycycline on, and it currently has an 80% mortality rate within 6 months. So it's extremely deadly for those who do have it. And specifically, oxidative phosphorylation, which is essentially mitochondrial function, is required for tumor growth and metastasis. And notably, what was previously found in the journal article was that doxycycline was able to inhibit these oxidative phosphorylation processes in breast cancer. So what I sought to do was to port that over to use in uveal melanoma. And additionally, what I found was that doxycycline could specifically inhibit the cancer stem cell growth. As for how I did that, specifically because doxycycline is such a rare cancer, I sought to create a model of it where I could essentially knock down some of the tumor suppressor genes within a human organoid model you created using stem cells. And by knocking down the specific P53 and BAP1 cancer genes, I was able to specifically induce cancer within that model and create a generalizable and replicable model of uveal melanoma within the human eye. And then after treating that uveal melanoma model with doxycycline, I was able to look at some of these computational models that were created by inserting those specific genes through a gene processing machine so then they could be ported into computational software. And essentially what is shown here is the different gene markers that are within the specific model, so then I could later group them together, which is shown here. And here is like the different labeled areas of the human eye based on the specific genes that were expressed within each of the regions. And specifically, if you look at A, that's of the normal human eye, and B, C, and D are of different classes of uveal melanoma. And in this picture, I show where the specific genes are expressed. So using this computational analysis, I was able to identify where specifically the most cancer-causing genes were expressed within the different eye regions. And notably here, we can see that they're mostly expressed in areas such as the neural crest and retina. So after that, I was able to do immunofluorescence analysis. And essentially through this, I was able to label where specifically these genes were expressed within the eye model, so then I could evaluate whether they were increased, like the tumor suppressor genes were increased, or whether they didn't have really, or whether doxycycline didn't really have an effect on any of these tumor suppressor genes. And what I found was after doxycycline treatment, as shown here, a lot of the specific tumor suppressor genes like BAP1 and SOX10 were able to increase in their presence, which meant that doxycycline is potentially a candidate for increasing tumor suppressor genes, so then it'll be really hard for cancer to start developing because there are these check and balances that prevent a cancer from developing within the eye. And within this model, I was able to use a qPCR machine, which is commonly used for things such as COVID tests, in order to identify the different levels of the genes that are impacted in uveal melanoma. And specifically, I was able to see that the oxidative phosphorylation genes, which are often within the mitochondria, were actually really decreased after treatment with doxycycline, which essentially means that it'll be really hard for these cancer cells to continue proliferating, continue dividing, because there's so little energy available for them to do so. As for some future implications, the most notable ones include a future investigation about doxycycline's impacts on liver cancer because uveal melanoma has an 80% mortality rate, it often spreads throughout the human body, and it often specifically goes to the liver and causes liver cancer as well. So doxycycline is a potential treatment to prevent that from happening within the liver. And there are other potential therapies that can take place, such as combined doxycycline and radiation therapy, because radiation therapy alone was seen to be ineffective in treating uveal melanoma. Here's a list of my references. Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name is Rohan Gotra, and my project is titled Uncovering Motif Interactions from Convolutional Attention Networks for Regulatory Genomics. Genetic disorders like Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, and cancer are caused by defects in the DNA that we call mutations. We know that these mutations cause problems by impacting the DNA's ability to bind to proteins, but our understanding of this process is still very limited. And so developing computer models that can understand this mechanism and predict how proteins will bind to the DNA is very important. One such model is the convolutional attention neural network, which is a form of artificial intelligence. This model has demonstrated very high performance in genome analysis tasks, but the problem is its success is predicated on framing the challenge in a way that actually hides most of the information it's learned. And what I mean by that is we give the model a DNA sequence and it will tell us if a protein will bind to DNA or not. And that's great, but that's not really what we're interested in. What we care more about is how it came to that decision. What features is it looking at in the DNA to predict if a protein will bind? And this is where a concept called interpretability comes into play. We need to be able to look at these models and pull out information that tells us how the proteins are binding, if they're looking for specific sequences along the DNA, if they're dependent on the binding of other transcription factors. And so in my study, I sought to develop a technique that allows us to pull this type of information from artificial intelligence models, or more specifically, the convolutional attention network. There was one study that also attempted to do this, and it called its technique Satori. And so I first sought out to investigate how effective this technique was, and the first step to doing that was developing a data set. So I generated my own data set consisting of randomly generated DNA sequences, and I trained several different models to see how Satori fared. And I found that in general, the performance of this technique was actually remarkably poor. It produced many false positives and wasn't very accurate. And so to address this, I designed my own technique that I call GLIFAC, which stands for Global Interactions via Filter Activity Correlation. And I showed in my study that my technique is much more effective at pulling out information from these convolutional attention neural networks. And the reason it does this is because my technique is more globalized, meaning it looks at multiple sequences instead of only one sequence when understanding how the DNA works. And so in summary, in my study, I showed that my technique called GLIFAC is much more effective at interpreting convolutional attention neural networks, which again is a form of artificial intelligence. And this is important because it allows us to further understand the DNA's regulatory mechanisms, meaning how proteins will interact with it. And this is really the first step to treating genetic disorders, because we know that mutations impact the assembly of the transcription initiation complex, which is critical to gene expression. And so if we can figure out how these proteins interact with the DNA, we can understand how mutations can affect gene expression, which again is necessary to understand for treating disorders like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, or cancer, or just any disorder that has origins in the DNA. Thank you. These are my references.
I want to thank the four of you for coming to the board meeting tonight and presenting to us. Aside from the fact that your presentations showed so much effort, so much ingenuity, it's really hard to get up here and talk in front of a lot of people, and that was really very impressive. So thank you so much for sharing with us. Congratulations. And thank you to our science department for helping these spectacular students reach their potential. Thank you. Okay. With that, if you would like to take an easy exit, you may. We're going to begin our budget presentation. If you'd like to stay for the meeting, please do. Dr. Rufo? I can't see her. Oh.
No, I'm good. Okay, we left off at security. Overall, you can see the security code increased by about 771,000 or 23%. It reflects increased presence of both in-house and contracted security, increased hours during the school day and for after-school activities and events. You may notice an increase in the FTE on the bottom right-hand corner. That does not reflect a decrease in security. It's just a transfer in security supervision from in-house staff to contracted a firm with law enforcement experience. Transfer to capital. The law allows school districts several mechanisms to complete capital work, and we've been successful over the past several years on putting capital projects into the transfer to capital project line item and have them completed that way. So for the proposed budget for 22-23, we have several projects in there that are listed in the blue box, essentially the library renovation, lighting for the turf field, tennis courts, some BCS projects, including some plumbing and roofing work, and then paving of the high school lot, which is the beat-up lot on the right in that photograph. Now, as we go through the budget process, the mix of projects may change. The other way that the state allows districts to complete capital projects is through the issuance of debt. And so our debt service line is up at the top, and it shows a decrease of about $1.4 million. As we discussed all during our capital presentations, our goal was to ultimately have level debt service. So as we had older debt rolling off, which is what you're seeing in that blue, in the blue bar, the other debt comes on to replace it, and in the out years, having essentially getting back to where we were. The debt that's rolling off was actually started in the early 2000s. So we move to the administration section of the budget. The chart on the right, the box on the right, shows all of the components that are included in there, and it represents just about 10%, a little under 10% of the district's operating budget. Overall, all the administrative codes increased by about 3.5% or $650,000 compared to the current year. Staffing changes made in the current school year, as well as contractual salary adjustments and other contracted expenses, are responsible for the rest of the increase. So let's just look at a couple of the codes that have variances. They begin with district meeting that contains all the expenses for the district's election, and that increased slightly just due to the expenditure trend. If you look at 2021, it's slightly more than we have budgeted for 21-22, so that's just an adjustment. The auditing code 1320 contains all the expenses for the different auditors that the district is required to have, and we did an RFP for our internal auditor, and we had expenses that were below our forecast, so that's what's responsible for the decrease in that code. Purchasing and personnel reflect essentially contractual salary increases of the staff that are in those areas. The box at the bottom has essentially the district's risk management program, another word for it, insurance. And I have a placeholder in there, 5%, while we work with our insurance experts on quotes for the following year. We were a little bit over budget this year, why it reflects a 7.8% increase with the 5% escalation. Central printing and mailing and data processing, again, contractual salary increases, and then there's an increase in BOCES cost for copy leases. The next two codes, curriculum development and supervision, account for the largest codes in the administrative section, essentially half of the expenses. So curriculum development increased by about $235,000 or 8%, and that reflects the increase of 1 FTE staff that was added in the current year to provide support for the elementary principals for evaluations and supervision. Contractual salary adjustments in that code account for the remainder, and supervision, which is the second code there, which contains all of the salaries of the building principals and their staff. That increased for next year, $242,000, and that's related to shifts in the current school year, including the increase of 0.5 FTE in the middle schools for APs, and 1 clerical increase in the high school attendance office to assist with reporting and monitoring of attendance data. The last topic we're going to go over tonight is revenue. Typically, we look at revenue next month, but I wanted to just share some information on state aid. If you look at the bottom line, state aid, we are showing a $5.5 million increase, primarily in foundation aid, and we had a hint last year that we might be getting an increase in aid. And this is the executive budget. We'll get the final budget later in March, hopefully. And while we're very pleased to have this additional revenue, it'll help against the other costs that are coming up. It does reflect, just in terms of scale, about 8% of the district's operating revenue. In the beginning, we talked about the pressure on TRS rates and the upwards pressure that's putting on the budget. The employer contribution rate went up to 10.29%, and that reflects an $850,000 increase in the budget. Fortunately, we had created the TRS reserve, so we can look to that, and we've been saving a little bit each year since we established that reserve, and so we could consider tapping into that reserve to offset the variance in that code. And we'll talk more about that next month, but I just wanted to give you a preview of some of the items that we were thinking about on the revenue side. And the March meeting, we'll go through the program and instructional budget, which accounts for about 80% of our operating budget, another look at revenue and reserves, and we'll any updates that we make to these codes and updates to the tax cap.
Thank you. Dr. Rufo, if we are adopting the budget in the April meeting and the budget vote is in May, how soon after we vote do we and can we get the budget report card out to voters by mail and by other means?
After we have the budget hearing, that's when the postcard goes out. We can't send out the postcard until after the budget hearing. But the materials, like the property tax report card and all of the budget materials, will be before the hearing. So very soon after the April adoption, we put all those papers together.
Okay, thank you. And approximately how long before the vote would voters expect to get that in the mail?
The budget brochure usually falls in, I want to say 2 weeks before is my recollection.
Okay, thank you.
At least 2 weeks, yes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the board to Dr. Rufo on her budget report? Carol?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rufo, for the budget presentation. Just 2 quick questions. I know you are going to talk about the program instructional budget next month, but in the beginning of today's presentation, you did mention that all the programs will be preserved under the current budget. I am curious to see if Project Beyond will be brought back next year, because I know that we don't have it, and I know that we brought back the night period in middle school, but Project Beyond still isn't here yet. So that was one. And the second question is that for the capital codes, there's one, the maintenance of plant 1621. You mentioned that there's going to be anticipated increases in overtime costs. Would you be able to elaborate a little more on that overtime costs and how much would that be?
Yeah.
And the overtime in relation to what projects?
Right. As you know, the district has been taking on different projects, from transfer to capital projects and projects we've borrowed for. We also do projects, smaller projects, as part of the operating budget, that 1621 budget. And oftentimes, those are required to be done after hours, and if they're done by our staff, then that's where you see the overtime costs. Sometimes when we have contractors additionally in the buildings, we have our staff stay here just to make sure that things are done properly, there's proper cleanup, if systems need to be turned on and off. We want our people who are familiar with our buildings there for those cases. And in speaking with Greg, we are looking at overtime costs very closely, and we're expecting, as projects sort of slow down, as the pace is slowing down, we're wrapping up a lot of our projects, that those costs will come down.
I'm sorry. Brian and then Shani.
I'll be quick. You mentioned, Dr. Rufo, and thank you for the presentation, in security, you mentioned that the change in FTE is shown, but there's also just the overall increase of about 23%
Yes.
in security. Could you explain that?
Yes. So security, this year, I think we're a little light in security. We based our numbers Last year, we had, the high school was in hybrid, so we had not as many kids in it at one time. We have more activities going on this year and have security presence. So we're seeing an uptick in our security costs, in our security presence, and our hours. And additionally, we hired, although it looks like there's an FTE flat in terms of our part-time security, we did hire additional security in the current year, so that we had budgeted 9 and we actually hired more as we moved more towards. So it's sort of a cascading effect of more hours and more security presence.
Thank you, Dr. Rufo. First question is, when you're calculating the tax cap for 2022, 2023, it goes, the first thing you calculate is the tax levy for 2021 to 2022. Is that calculation the what is allowed, or the actual levy?
It's the starting point is the actual levy.
Okay. And the second one is that in central printing and mailing, our budget is a little bit over $500,000. Do we have any plan on going a little bit away from printing and going paperless, and by doing so reducing the expense on printing?
Yes, and we have over the years certainly moved less towards paper, and as you know, our students use a lot of electronic resources. We do mailings, we do budget brochures, and so I don't know that we'll ever completely move away from paper, but we certainly have made a lot of our notices to schools are electronic and have moved in that direction.
Any other board member have a question about budget? Okay, thank you, Dr. Rufo.
Okay.
Next, we have the approval for the minutes of meeting dated January 10th, 2022. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Falco, seconded by Ms. Levitan. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Dr. Rufo, you're back for the treasurer's report.
As indicated in the treasurer's report, the cash on hand for the month end December 31st, 2021 is $112,433,098.41. It shows that bank balances for all accounts were reconciled to book balances and were collateralized in accordance with the district's banking agreements and investment policy.
It got a little quieter, but all right. Good evening. First of all, I just want to add my congratulations to the young people who did so well. Obviously, they've left the room now, but it really is a credit to all of the people who worked so hard for them. And I just want to thank the audience here. I know how hard it is for me to speak when there's a little crackle in the air. I can only imagine how hard it must have been for the young people. And so you were very gracious and very welcoming to them, and I'm sure it put them at ease. And so I want to thank you for that kindness. That said, part of the conversation tonight, part of what I'm going to try and do is set a little bit of context. So obviously, no one's been through a pandemic before, and we're all trying to figure out the best way to move through this pandemic and to get to the other side. Certainly, I would say that for my part, and for Con, you can put my presentation up whenever you're ready. The last 23 months for me have been about trying to do everything in our power to keep students and staff safe. And since the beginning of this pandemic, I've had 3 goals. 3 goals that I've discussed with the board, 3 goals that the board has emphasized. Goal 1, keep everybody safe. Goal 2, get everybody back in person as soon as possible. Goal 3, return as much of our activities to pre-pandemic normal as possible. But we've been doing that slowly, methodically, and what we've tried to do is every time we add something back, find some way to compensate for whatever additional risk is added. So in looking at this, I'm a science person by training and background myself, and so I see my world through data. I'm going to share with the board, with you, the data that I find informative in terms of trying to understand the moment that we're at right now, and also data that I think helps us see around the corner for where we're going to be soon. And obviously, the better we can see around the corner, the better we can plan for the future, the better we can work on those three goals of keeping everybody safe, keeping everybody in person, and returning as much as we can to pre-pandemic normal. So with that said, at last month's meeting, it was only a month ago, we were at the very top of the peak, and it looked like it had just started to crest, but obviously without knowing if that was true or not, it was still a guess at that point. But obviously it has crested and it has fallen sharply. This is extraordinarily good news. There are lots of data sites online that let you compare how we've fared through this Omicron surge to a lot of other countries, South Africa, Britain, and no one has had as steep an up and as steep a down as we've experienced here. These are Nassau and Suffolk County data, and then some more localized data. But what strikes me from this map, from this chart, is the large peak in January of 2021, which we're calling the ancestral peak, versus this peak, which was 4 times as high. So even though we have fallen a tremendous amount from where we were at the beginning of January when the Omicron peaked, that was 4 times where we were when what we thought was the worst peak we were ever going to see last January. It really is a stunning event. So the variants in circulation have changed. So obviously in the fall, the Delta variant was what we were experiencing. Our understanding of the Delta variant was that it was more transmissible than the variants that had come before, Alpha and the ancestral variant. And not only more transmissible, but slightly more virulent, meaning more likely to cause more serious disease. That Delta variant has been displaced entirely by Omicron. And if you go onto the state's site from which this data is derived, right now this data is showing 0 Delta left in circulation in New York, all Omicron. That's good news. Not good news that there's Omicron circulating by any stretch of the imagination, but it is better news that it is Omicron than it is Delta, and here's why. Actually, let me come back to that slide. So Omicron seems to have fewer severe outcomes than Delta. And these are 2 research studies that compare experiences for populations of students, one student's 5 and other, one student's a little bit older, and what are the likelihood of severe outcomes from COVID for students during a period of time when mostly Delta was in circulation and a period in time where mostly Omicron was in circulation. And you can see that the severe outcomes were roughly 3 times more likely when Delta was in circulation than Omicron. So it is reassuring that there is apparently no Delta in circulation anymore, because this is clearly the nastier of the 2 variants. And you can see this also in the rate of hospitalization. This is Nassau County data. So there's 2 axes here. One axis, the green axis, corresponds to the green line. That's the number of cases. And then the other axis corresponds to the orange line. That's the number of hospitalizations. So the 2 axes are shifted so that you can see the first peak as though they were identical. So if there was as much hospitalization from Omicron as there was from the ancestral variant, then the second orange peak would be just as high as the second green peak. But it's not. It's considerably lower. So what does that mean? It means that hospitalizations during the Omicron peak went up 50%, even though there was a 400% increase in the number of cases. So that's good, because it means that Omicron does not result in hospitalization as frequently as Delta did, but it's still more hospitalizations than there were just because of the raw sheer number of cases. So one thing that's also a feature of Omicron and new is reinfection. So for most of the pandemic, there were people who were getting sick with COVID more than once, but they were very, very few. It wasn't until Omicron came along that we were seeing larger numbers of people becoming reinfected. And that is because Omicron is somewhat different from Delta, different enough that the immunity conferred by either vaccination or by natural infection was not as powerful as it was when it was the Delta variant, which was more similar to earlier variants. So the question is now, are there other variants? As we try to look around the corner, what is on the horizon? So in the this is a family tree, if you'll use that as a metaphor, for all of the COVID variants that have been found and had their genomes sequenced. So there are literally thousands of variants. The group of teal-colored variants on the top are all the variants in the Delta family. The blue just below it is another strain of Delta. The orange is the Omicron. And the further right these lines go, the more it is present day. So you can see at the bottom, there's a purple variant that died out. There's another green variant that died out. And the Delta variant, for the most part, is no longer in circulation. It's just the Omicron variant that is circulating. And this is just US data. If you did this same plot for the world as a whole, you'd see that there are a lot of other variants that are still circulating. The only question in terms of whether those variants will come here is if, like Omicron, they're much more transmissible than the variants currently in circulation. In other words, they'd have to be even more transmissible than Omicron, which has been the most transmissible we've seen so far. So it is possible that there will be other variants, but right now, none are circulating, at least not in large numbers here. So just some context for where we are now. Even though we have fallen a lot, the actual raw number of cases in circulation right now is still higher than where we were at the Delta peak. So if these numbers keep falling at this rate, they're going to fall through that floor soon. But in terms of raw numbers, we are at where we were in September and October when Delta was at its highest. The good news is cases have fallen from 450 per 100,000, that's daily new cases, to 34. That's great. But to give you a sense of just how many cases there are, in the last 2 weeks, there have been 8,700 cases in Nassau County versus 6,900 cases in the entire month of October, which is when we were experiencing the Delta peak. So we're definitely going in the right direction, but we're not quite out of the woods yet. But I do think we're in a better place than we were spring a year ago. And spring a year ago was actually good. We saw case numbers get very low, and we saw a lot of activities get restored. And versus last year, we now have the advantage of vaccination, better therapeutics, and a much less virulent variant in circulation in Omicron. So for all of those reasons, this spring to me looks like we're in better shape than we were last spring. So the dotted line on here just illustrates visually where we are right now in our falling peak and where the top of the Delta peak was. So we're going to fall through that floor for sure and hopefully keep falling to where we were last summer. That's the lowest dip on the chart, but we're not there yet. And because we're not there yet, obviously we've been working to try and keep everyone safe. So I compiled this list. I realized the letters are small and too hard to read, but these are all the things that we have been adding back over the last 23 months to try and get ourselves back to normal. And when I think of how we started last year, we didn't let kids share objects on the playground because we didn't know if that was safe. We didn't let them do science labs and share microscopes or test tubes or share books in classrooms, share art supplies in classrooms. All of that is in the past. Plexiglass is obviously in the past. And we've made some pretty chunky decisions about moving all kids in at the high school, moving desks to 3 feet apart. We've restored all community use of facilities. Students are back to 9-period day in the middle school. They're using lockers again. We have been restoring as many activities as we can, and we have plans to continue to restore more as we fall through that floor and our case counts go below where we were at the Delta peak. So what are those future considerations that I'm also looking at? Obviously, the February break is going to result in travel. We saw a tremendous increase in cases after the January break. And so that, to me, looks like the next point that we're going to have to keep our eye on in terms of what it's going to mean for us. And there's clearly a difference in the level of vaccination among elementary age students and secondary age students. So just 2 more slides, again, trying to look around the corner. So we have been planning with the elementary principals ideas for activities that we can do to start bringing families back onto the campus. We believe and we know that there is a lot of value in having our families together with one another. It builds our sense of community. We also know that there are parents who have not had the opportunity, new parents, new kindergarten parents or new parents of first graders who didn't get a chance for a kindergarten orientation last year. We'd love to get them into the building and introduce them to the building. We know how important this year is for our 5th graders. We have a bunch of special things planned at each of the buildings for recognizing them. And just a convenience for parents, we're restarting the drop-off of things that students forget and leave at home. So that will help. And in addition, we'll be permitting folks to identify a second person who could be someone who could carpool, pick the student up at the end of the day. We think we can manage that safely, so we're prepared to add that back. Again, all of this is chipping away at the pile of things that we want to do to get back to where we were. The secondary level, particularly the high school, we've done some work with the contractor who put in the new air conditioning system, and we've determined that the fan system can be run without air conditioning. In other words, run it in a fan mode. It has a MERV 13 filter in it. So although it wasn't designed for this purpose, we can use it as a very large scale air filter. And we believe that that is a way of mitigating the risk of having more people in the gym. So we'd like to have more people in the gym. We'll run that fan. We're able to do that without overcooling the space. And we've identified some places where we can have additional room in the bleachers. So Mr. Cronin and Mr. Cardillo have been working on that. And I know the board wants to talk a little bit about graduation later in the meeting. Last year, the state gave us guidance and rules for how to conduct graduation. Those rules showed up in April. So we're anticipating that we're going to be given some guidance again this year. I haven't been told that we won't get it, haven't been told that we will. But until we have some sense of what the state is going to require, what we've been trying to do is maintain as much agility and flexibility as possible so that we can react to that. And then just lastly, to the point about the February break, the state has been supplying us from what used to be very scarce rapid tests. Now we have ample rapid tests. And so if for any reason you want or need rapid tests, if you're planning on traveling, you want to test yourself, test your whole family, we have ample tests to make that possible for you. You just have to let your building know. The building nurse will be able to furnish you with the test kits that you need. And again, this is just a way for us to all monitor ourselves so that we keep our neighbors as safe as possible. So that concludes my report, and thank you.
The mic is working. Can anyone hear me out there? Okay, great. Appreciate that. That's so much better. Are there board members that have questions about the superintendent's report? Brian.
Dr. Rogers, you mentioned in your report that we're working towards, I think you said, in-person activities for elementary families when the weather improves. And you obviously acknowledge that it's been a long time now that kindergarten parents and a lot of first grade parents have even been in the building Many have never been in the building. And I'm wondering, can we give them that opportunity like sooner than later? Like not wait until the weather gets better? If you didn't clap, I would have offered to do the tours of the buildings. I know it's difficult to plan this. It just jumps out at me. I have elementary kids as something we should probably do. Just whether it's an orientation, a tour, just let them, a lot of us on this board were spoiled. We served lunch for many years. We spent a lot of time in those buildings, and these families haven't done it yet at all. Thank you.
Yeah, that planning is already well underway, and we're planning on some late afternoon/evening activities that will make that possible, and that won't need to wait for better weather necessarily to do. So that's something, those announcements will come from the building level as opposed to from me, but the buildings will be reaching out to their families and their parents.
Anyone else on the board have questions? Ms. Levitan?
Dr. Rogers, could you elaborate a little bit on what's coming from our governor in light of today's news from our neighboring state? Are we expecting any sort of matrix that her predecessor used to write out in detail? And perhaps also about the timeline of what's going on with the mask mandate and the news that we're all very familiar with. Just what's to come, what to expect the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Is there anything being communicated to the superintendents, to the districts as to, whether or not the governor is going to follow New Jersey and
yeah. Sure. So I don't have any inside information. I get my news from the newspaper as well, although I try hard to keep myself informed, obviously. So I'll tell you what I think I heard this week, and then are you asking for an update on the legal status of the mask mandate that's being adjudicated right now?
anything you know that we don't?
I won't presume to know something that you don't, but I'll tell you what I do know. So I saw the announcement today that the governor announced, yesterday Governor Murphy in New Jersey announced that they're going to be ending the mask mandate sometime in mid-March. The governor in New York said that she's going to make an announcement, I believe, on Wednesday about the indoor mask mandate for businesses, arenas, places, commercial places, but not for schools. And I believe she said something about it would be premature to do something for schools at this time. So that's what I read in the newspaper. So if I'm misquoting the newspaper, that's my mistake, but that's what I recall reading. That said, what's the status of the mask mandate? So the mask mandate is a regulation. It's 10 NYCRR 2.60. It was adopted originally in August. It had a 90-day life. It was adopted again as an emergency regulation in November. It has another 90-day life. It's adopted under something called the State Administrative Procedures Act, which is the rules for how the state can issue regulations in addition to laws. So the State Administrative Procedures Act says that if you adopt a rule on an emergency basis, it either has to be renewed after 90 days or it must expire after 90 days. So the expiration of that particular rule will take place on February 21st. Now, the question will be whether the state renews it again, as they did the last time. If the state renews it again, the SAPA, the State Administrative Procedures Act, says it can be renewed for another 60 days if it's renewed again. So I don't have any insight as to whether the state will or will not renew it. So what's the status of the court case? Oh, and I should just parenthetically say one other thing. That particular regulation, the New York State mask mandate that applies to schools, applies to the indoor school facilities. It is not the mandate that is controlling buses. The mandate that controls masks on buses is a federal rule that is promulgated by the CDC. So irrespective of what happens with the mask mandate in New York, until the CDC removes that rule, their rule for buses will still stand. So two different authorities with two different lanes, if you'll pardon the pun. So now, where is the lawsuit? So that particular regulation has gone to court twice. It was upheld in an Albany State Supreme Court, and it was struck in a Nassau State Supreme Court. Ironically, in New York, the Supreme Court is the lowest level, not the highest level. So the next level above the Supreme Court is the Appellate Division. Above that is the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals is the highest court in the state. So the finding in the Nassau case was that the state violated the State Administrative Procedures Act in how it enacted this rule, in so much as the judge ruled that the agency which adopted the rule exceeded its authority, and that a rule this expansive should have been adopted by a law that was passed by the legislature. That's the narrow question of law at stake. So it's being appealed, and the appellate division granted a stay. Obviously, the rule remains in place because of the appellate division's stay until they rule on the case. And there are 4 attorneys on the board who know far more about how the appellate division works than I do, but my understanding is that the state is required to file its brief with the court by March 2nd. Then the plaintiffs, the ones who were successful in Nassau County Supreme Court, will have the opportunity to respond to the state's briefs, and that will they have up to 30 days to respond. So if the state files its briefs on March 2nd and the plaintiffs respond within 30 days, that takes you to April 2nd. Then the state gets to respond back to them. That's another 30 days. That takes us into May, before presumably the appellate division would rule. So 2 things are on parallel tracks here. One is, how fast will this process move through the appellate division? It appears to me that the appellate division will not be in a position to issue an order until May, early May. And then will or won't the state renew the mandate on February 21st when it expires? So that's the current state of affairs. Now, one of the things, I know we've talked about 2 immediate neighboring states, but I'd like to just bring up a third. So one of the things that Massachusetts has done is they have put together criteria for what they would see as an environment that is safe enough to remove more of the pandemic restrictions. So New York has not done that yet, and the State Association of Superintendents, for example, has asked the health department, the governor, to put together something similar to what Massachusetts has done, which is to kind of illustrate what are the data points that they're looking at and what are the places where the state would feel that it is safe to remove some of the layered mitigation strategies, masks and other things that we have in place. So New York has not done that in the way that Massachusetts has done that. So it's hard to know what criteria they're using to make their decision. And I would want, as an administrator, I would want to know not just what the off-ramp is, but what if there's something as bad as Omicron out there that comes upon us as suddenly as Omicron? We would want to know what the on-ramp was too, in case some new danger appeared. Now, I'm not hoping for a new danger, believe me, it's been 2 long years. But we would want to know how we would protect ourselves and how we would evaluate whether something scary was on the horizon and we needed to protect ourselves. So I think the state has, I agree with the position of the Association of School Superintendents, that the state needs to be more articulate about what they see as the criteria that they would use to make that decision.
For all of that to resolve, I mean, obviously the 3 tracks, 2 tracks you mentioned already. as a district, what could be done today to at least start planning for the transition out of this new normal into the old normal? I mean, are we even talking about it? Do we, obviously we can regroup in a day. So what can we do today to prepare when the day comes? We're ready. We're ready to go. And, everyone is understanding. There is no bullying, shouting in the classroom. There is no fighting, between kids, teacher, kids, any combination. How do we assure that when the day comes, it's going to be civil and respectful transition back to the hopefully old normal?
Yeah,
Sorry.
It's a great question. Obviously, what happened on that Tuesday was a bit of an ambush, and I think Syosset handled it well. I think some other districts experienced more bumps, but it wasn't perfect either. So one of the things that we did was we huddled as an administrative team, the entire administrative team of the district. We had a meeting, and the number one agenda item on that meeting was for us to start to go through and plan for if this were to happen again, either because the courts decided to remove the mask mandate or because the time came that it was time for us to remove the mask mandate, what are all the things that we needed to know and to be able to do and to have pre-planned and in place? So we created for ourselves a bunch of internal documents about how we would structure things, and then we also created an FAQ document that we would release to the community. So there are obviously a lot of unknowns because who knows what the state's going to do exactly, but we started to think through what some of the challenges would be. We have answers for a lot of the challenges. We have questions into our attorney for a couple of the challenges. I think there are a couple of things that we're wrestling with, and just to be very candid about it, the level of tolerance of risk is on a continuum. It isn't everybody on one side, everybody on another. There are people along a continuum with their level of comfort. And we can't accommodate the extreme of either end because it leaves no room to maneuver in the middle. So my point is that we will probably have people who will want to send their kids to school with masks, but will also want to have some distance from between themselves and unmasked kids. And that's why it's a difficult challenge. So I'm like I said,
So at this point in the meeting, I would just remind everyone, all your questions can definitely be asked, but in a few minutes, as soon as Dr. Rogers is finished with his superintendent's report and answers the questions of the board, you will have an opportunity to come up here and ask your questions and make comments even. And to the extent that we have answers to your questions, those can be answered today, but we have a ledger on the podium that has room for your name and address. And so to the extent that we have to do research in order to answer your questions, we can follow up with you and we'll have a means to do that. So if you can just be patient for a few more minutes while Dr. Rogers answers the board's questions, you'll have an opportunity to ask them as well. Thank you.
I have one other question. And Dr. Rogers, I read the letter that you referred to. I believe it was the Council of School Superintendents. It was a great letter, and maybe I'm thinking outside the box here. But I think we did something like this when we wrote Tom Suozzi a letter about the SALT deduction. Why aren't we sending that kind of letter now to the governor and asking for clarity on these things? I mean, we're at the mercy right now of the state, so we should be asking them for metric-based formulas. I don't remember Dr. Rogers' analogy about getting on and off the parkway, but he's right. And we should do that. We should send them that kind of letter, put some pressure on them. we try to be leaders, and this is not a bad opportunity to do it. I know we're just one district, but other people are doing this, and if Dr. Rogers, you can tell me who the Council of Superintendents organization is, but I read that letter. It's wonderful. They're asking for exactly what I think we should be asking for. I don't want to plagiarize it, but it should be something like that. I mean, this is more of a question, I guess, for the board and not necessarily the superintendent, but I guess I'm wondering what the process would be if we wanted to send that kind of letter.
Sure. So first, obviously, discussion with the board. Normally, we would put it on as a discussion item, and we would talk about what kinds of things we would want in a letter. So with the superintendent's letter that you're referring to, that's the type of letter where you're asking for clarity as to expectations on how they're going to decide whether or not to remove the mask mandate, what kind of scientific metrics are they looking at to make those determinations, really about setting expectations. You also mentioned letters like other districts are sending. Other districts haven't sent that letter. So what I'm reading are letters of districts that have taken a position one way or another and asking for a determination to be made as to the removal of masks. And those are two very different letters. So I guess when you do, put this on for discussion, it's just about being clear on what kind of letter you're looking for, and then the board can have a discussion on that and obviously look at some examples. Would be helpful.
So I am referring to the Council of School Superintendents letter. I'm asking for the state, as they bicker amongst themselves with these, three, branches of government. I want them to give us a date. I want them to give us metrics. I mean, they're going to do it, right? Other states are doing it, and they're going to do it, and let's put some pressure on them to do it. But if it's got to be a discussion item, I mean, time is short here. And it would be nice if we could do something quickly and get it out if we have board support to do so. But
yeah, I mean, listen, the reason why the process is typically discussion items is because, I'm sorry, I'm going to use this one. The reason why we put things on as discussion items is so that board members have had a chance to contemplate, so that they don't have to make a spur of the moment decision on something like advocacy. So just in terms of board operations to help guide a discussion that's more intelligent, it's helpful to do that. Are there any other questions for Dr. Rogers? Lisa?
Just to continue with the letter, I don't think it's so much putting our opinion into the letter as just asking the governor for information. We're just asking questions. I think that's what Brian was alluding to, correct? Just asking the governor questions as far as getting some dates or information as to what she's looking at as being the criteria for when the next step is. Not necessarily putting our opinion into the letter.
Is there anyone else? Shani?
It's not a question, just wanted to make a comment. And I didn't want to lose this chance to appreciate what we are doing here. There are so many people here voicing, challenging what the government has implemented to us. And in many of the world, this would not be so free. What we are doing here is privilege the right that you have to enjoy. And we take it for granted, like air, like sunshine. We take it for granted. But there are so many people in the world who will have to risk their lives, their family's livelihood, to do exactly what we do here. But however, I do see, I'm surprised at this simple dualistic mindset we have. Because, I believe I'm right, therefore you have to be wrong. I am doing this for the children. I'm doing this for the children, and it has an altruistic motive. Therefore, you have evil motive. I don't think that's the mindset that we should be going in. Yes. Okay.
I'm sorry, excuse me, but just for a moment, Shani, I'm so sorry, but listen, we are going to need to take a beat if we can't be respectful of the people that are speaking at the time that they're speaking. Right now, it is the board's opportunity to ask Dr. Rogers questions and to make comments, but soon it's going to be your opportunity to do that, and I really hope that for the rest of the meeting, we can take our turns and not jump on each other for their views. Everyone has a right to their opinion for sure. Shani?
So what I'm asking is, let's give each other a little bit of trust. We are in the same team, right? We all want what is best for our children.
So trust us to make the decisions for all.
Listen.
One more thing I would ask you. Let's do this. We are so sure that we are right. Let's give ourselves a little bit of room. Let's give ourselves a little bit of leeway to be wrong.
I'm sorry. We're going to just take a 5-minute break.
I think we can do this. Oh, okay. All I'm asking is that we do this with a little bit of respect. Yes, a little bit of respect.
Shani, we're taking a 5-minute break.
Taking 5-minute break. Wow. Just sitting here. This is going to be a long one. That's discussion item. That's after the audience to public.
Shani, do you want to continue? You're done? Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. Thank you. We're going to begin audience to the public. Just a few rules. General behavior of respect. So we have a lot of people here that have their opportunity to speak. We have 4 minutes. At the end of 4 minutes, I'm going to ask you politely to please take your seat to give your other neighbors a chance to speak. When your neighbor speaks, if they should say something that you don't approve of, please just hear them out and do not yell from your seat. If you yell from your seat, we're going to have to stop the meeting. We don't poll board members. We don't allow it. We don't talk about specific teachers. We don't talk about specific students because of privacy laws. We cannot. So please make your questions or comments general and not about our staff or students. At the end of this round of audience to the public, we will ask you to take your seats and we will do our very best to answer your questions. If we can't, like I said before, we will endeavor to get you the answers that you're looking for if that's something that we can do research on. So with that, please come state your name and residence because you have to be a Syosset resident to speak here.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Rogliano. I'm the mother of 2 students at Bayless Elementary. Today I'd like to follow up on a topic that I brought up last month that we've been also discussing tonight regarding parent and family attendance at school events. So what has changed? Like Dr. Rogers noted, last month there was about a 20% infection rate. Now we're about 4%. But most importantly, between last month and today, I created an online petition titled Addressing Family Attendance at School Events and Extracurricular Activities in Syosset. I have a copy of the petition here for you that I can hand to you guys, and I can email you the files with the signatures and all of the comments after the meeting. But 558 parents signed the petition, stating that they are ready to get back into the schools for indoor and outdoor events. In light of this support and the school district email that I received on Friday, I have the following questions. First, the email states that we're waiting for our numbers to go down below the Delta surge of September to plan outdoor events for parents. Can you please help me understand how you arrived at this parameter? If we're trying to reach numbers that we were at after a September surge, what prevented us from having any fall events at the school this past year? Second, I received the flyer regarding the high school musical. It stated that 2,400 people would be able to be in the audience. That's wonderful news. But again, I'm looking for some clarification. How can it be possible to plan an indoor event of that magnitude 1 month out, but we're waiting for lower case numbers to plan an outdoor event at the elementary schools? In addition, if we know that in 1 month, 2,400 people can gather, what's stopping you from lifting current restrictions? For example, I think it would be very reasonable to assume that we could have more than one parent attend our children's basketball games as soon as next weekend. This reminds me of a similar instance last fall. The entire district was invited to the high school carnival the weekend before Halloween. It was a great event. I was there. However, the schools did not allow parents on the properties for even a Halloween parade. Last, I'd like to understand why you're not yet considering inside events for parents, like Mr. Greco had brought up. People are living their lives. They're going in and out of buildings daily with appropriate safety protocols. There's no reason that the same can't be done in schools, or they should be viewed as a place of contagion. Overall, we all know there's many layers to the mitigation strategies that are in place in the schools, and we all have varying opinions about them all. The one point that we could all agree on is that parent involvement in school activities is a very important aspect of our children's school-age years. Keeping parents out of the schools has affected all of us and our children. One can even argue that pre-pandemic, the district wasn't offering enough parent involvement. And this petition shows that Syosset is ready to make a change and move forward. It's time. We all want to be a part of our children's accomplishments at school. So, Dr. Rogers, each week I receive your emails about what's happening in the schools. And at the end, you always include a bright spot. How great would it be for your next email's bright spot to state that we're holding in-person events with our parents and our families again, and we're lifting spectator limits. The district is ready, and addressing this would go such a long way for many. Thank you for your time. Would you like me to hand out a copy of the petition, or should I send it in an email?
Sure, if you can actually put that on the front desk, we'll be able to get them when we're finished. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Monsef. I am the mother of twins who currently attend kindergarten at Bayless. I'd like to address parental involvement in school activities, functions, and events. The past 2 years have been extremely challenging for everyone, especially for school-age children and their families. It is evident from current data we are no longer in a time of crisis, and it is time to begin getting back to a place where activities and events can be shared, as it is the healthiest option for our children. As a new parent to our district, I've witnessed an overwhelming difference in how our district is handling school events as compared to other Long Island districts. It is difficult to understand why there is such a vast difference in these experiences for our children. I was disappointed when my twins were not invited to Bayless for an in-person kindergarten orientation. Syosset decided to check this box by offering a virtual orientation 3 months before the start of school. In August, I saw photos on social media of kindergarten orientation being held in person and mostly with parents in several school districts across Long Island. I believe the virtual orientation was not in the best interest of our children. I've gathered several photos from districts all over Nassau County showing parental involvement in school concerts and performances, holiday activities and classroom parties, Thanksgiving feasts, parents as guest readers, Halloween parades, sports events, parent-teacher conferences, and career day. As you can see, Syosset is handling parent participation very differently and, in my opinion, to the detriment of our children. Our children thrive on praise and acknowledgement for their hard work and success. Studies show that children have the greatest success academically when parents are involved and partner with their school. There should be no reason under the current COVID stats why we can't join in the rest of Long Island and put our children's needs first. Our children's education will shape their entire lives, and parental involvement is one of the most important parts of this equation. Recent studies confirm our worst fears. This pandemic is going to have a lasting impact on our children's mental health. The International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health reports that physical restrictions and social distancing measures have affected every domain of our children's lives. Study after study show that this pandemic has caused stress, worry, helplessness, and risky behavioral problems among children and adolescents. These feelings are resulting in increased amounts of substance abuse, suicide, and academic issues. Although the number of children significantly affected by this disease is minute, the containment measures have negatively impacted their mental health and well-being. Thankfully, we are beginning to see a decline in the severity of COVID. I am grateful that throughout the entirety of this pandemic, children seem to be affected the least by this virus. Right now, the current mortality rate in children 18 and under is less than 0.01%. However, it frightens me to know that substance abuse is on the rise and suicide attempts in adolescent girls has increased over 50% during this pandemic. While our children are not getting physically sick from this virus, they are suffering nonetheless, and the full impact will be felt for years to come. Science appears to support the fact that COVID-19 is here to stay. The likelihood of having 0% cases is not realistic. However, we can clearly see the virus is getting weaker. With all the mental health issues our children are facing due to this virus, we should be doing everything in our power to help lift them up, make them feel proud of their work, and celebrate their talents. It's time for parents to be involved in their children's education and school community more than ever before. Our parents want to be back in the building. That is clear from the petition put together by one of our own Syosset moms. It is crystal clear our neighboring districts have found a way to put the children first and bring parents back into the school buildings, as this is truly in the best interest of students. This is time that we cannot get back with our children, and time is fleeting. Thank you. And I also made I made some packets of what other districts are doing, pictures that I compiled from other parents in Nassau County and their the school websites.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I've been in the Syosset School District for 25 years.
Could you introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
I'm Michelle Weiner.
Thank you.
I have 4 kids, and I've been happy for the most part. And yes, I am against masking my children for over 8 hours a day and all other mandates. And yes, my family's health and well-being has always been my top priority. Last 5 years, I've been studying the human body and systems and network biology, and I've learned a lot about true health. Masks are not about true health. Teaching healthy children they are sick and dangerous is sick and dangerous. And we will pay the price for teaching that to our children for the past 2 years. Despite the fog of contradictory claims and changing government guidelines, dozens of scientific journals have published consistent data that establish these facts. 97% of all people recover from COVID-19, and children, especially 0 to 19, as stated by the CDC, have a 99.997% survival rate. So why are we covering our children's faces for 8 hours a day? COVID-19 is mainly spread by microscopic aerosols generated by breathing, talking, sneezing, coughing. The vast bulk of these infectious aerosols easily penetrate common masks because 90% of the aerosols are less than 1/17th the size of the pores in the finest surgical masks and less than 1/80th the size of pores in the finest cloth masks. Aerosols are light enough to stay airborne for minutes or hours, and hence they also travel freely through the gaps in the edges of these cloth and surgical masks. Government enacted these mask mandates based on false assumptions that COVID-19 is mainly transmitted by large droplets generated by coughing, sneezing, and spittle. These droplets are bigger than the pore size of most masks and only remain airborne for a few seconds after they are emitted. I could keep going, but I'm going to move on. Why do many associations still promote masks? There are many answers to that, and one being that many doctors have openly admitted to losing their licenses if they go against the mask mandates and vaccine narrative. And yet, today there are plenty of mainstream doctors and experts like Dr. Scott Gottlieb from the FDA and Dr. Monica Gandhi, Dr. Lucy McBride, who have said it's time to stop forcing these restrictions on our kids. But I'm here to tell you that masks have been harming our children for the past 2 years. They obstruct our children's breathing and respiratory systems. They are communication barriers. As stated by the American Academy of Pediatrics and the WHO, masks hinder language and socio-emotional development. Seeing faces is an extreme important part of child development. Prolonged use of masks can cause asthma, anxiety, headaches, confusion, fatigue, increased heart rate, facial microclimate and bacterial growth, dental problems, irritation of the mouth and skin, and dangerous carbon dioxide levels. Masks were not intended nor created for children to wear 8 hours a day. You have been hurting our babies, and you must stop forcing this. If there is a risk, there must be a choice. Like these possible COVID vaccine mandates that you're going to possibly enforce on our children. They do not prevent transmission nor infection and do not have any long-term safety data. They carry risks. They carry risk of adverse events, especially in young men, and many children have been infected and have natural immunity. So there's no need to force experimental treatments on our children. You've done enough. I'd like to end with the fact that states with mask mandates versus states with non-mask mandates, it's basically the non-mandated states are doing better than the mask-mandated states, and children are at the lowest risk for COVID, but at the highest risk for missing developmental milestones. Why are they the last to unmask? Is it cruelty? Is it indifference? Is it stupidity? History will not look kindly on our evidence-free decision to mask, to make our kids suffer the most. The last thing, SARS-CoV-2 virus is a new virus in town. It's not going anywhere, just like the flu, pneumonia, stomach virus, and all the billions of other viruses we have lived with since the beginning of time. Nobody likes to be sick. So take all this mask energy and teach children how to live healthier lifestyles and be empowered with the knowledge like wholesome food, good sleep, fresh air, exercise, vitamin D, C, zinc, and maybe a little bit of fun. And then we will all be in a much better situation for the next novel virus that comes our way.
Thank you, Ms. Weiner.
Oh, I can't read without my glasses. That's all right, hang on. Don't time it yet. Hold the clock, hold the clock.
Hold the clock. Okay, so my name is Kelly Brocky. I've spoken to you guys before at the beginning of the school year talking about exactly what that woman talked about. Thank you so much. And about toys. So what I decided to talk about was just data. We just had all those wonderful kids who all did all those science experiments. They were using data that meant something. So let's talk about the data that got us into this math problem. We've been told over and over to follow the science. We were told that masks would bring the infection rates under control. The CDC told state and local governments that would be one of the most important variables in the battle against COVID. As a result, the school district and the school boards across the country have been masking our kids for almost 2 years now. Did you know that the CDC pre-planning documents and communication did not even support their own mask recommendations? On February 26, 2020, experts from the CDC began to make recommendations on policy implementation at individual and community levels. Their documents covered 200 journal articles written between 1990 and 2016 and was specifically tailored to a non-pharmaceutical intervention for an influenza-type pandemic like COVID-19. The CDC planned years in advance for just this scenario. They specifically trained for a pandemic influenza where there was no vaccine and no proven medical treatment available. During all the training and pandemic role-playing games that they were doing before the COVID outbreak, the CDC never once mentioned masks in any of their pandemic planning. Masks were not even considered a marginal benefit mitigation, and there were no claims that masks even had the slightest potential to protect people or potentially impact widespread transmission. So the CDC took their carefully prepared, thoroughly detailed practice documents written by their best public health experts the organization had to offer and essentially just tore them up. No new research was ever cited by the CDC to support the effectiveness of masks or to look at the different levels of efficiency between the cloth mask, the surgical mask, and the N95 mask. In March of 2020, Dr. Fauci told the American people that there is no reason to be walking around with masks. He said masks were scientifically ineffective and even potentially harmful to wear. He even mentioned unintended consequences from wearing a mask, which what we are all saying is happening with our children, these unintended consequences. However, a month later, Fauci joined the CDC and told the public to wear a cloth mask. In an email dated February 4, 2020, Fauci told a colleague that the type of mask you buy at a drugstore is not effective in keeping out a virus which is small enough but pass-through material. He even stated that he does not recommend this colleague to wear a mask. He said the mask will maybe stop big droplets from a cough or sneeze, but it will not stop the spread of the virus. Like the CDC, Fauci's opinion dramatically flipped without any significant evidence-based research. There's none. Fauci knew that the evidence on masks had not changed because one of his top employees confirmed to him via an email March 31st, 2020 that there was no positive impact from masking based on the gold standard of scientific randomized controlled trials. The WHO also stated that there was a lack of evidence for the effectiveness of face masks in the community setting during an influenza-type pandemic. So overall, the science was wrong from the very beginning. So for 2 years, guess what? Oh, wait, sorry. So I can't read this. So guess what? The CDC actually has returned back to actual science and stated that cloth masks don't work. Y'all just heard that right. The CDC said cloth masks don't work. The only thing that actually works are the N95s. Not even the KN95s, just the N95s. So the CDC just came out with that and said everyone who's wearing a cloth mask in this room does not work. Anyone who's wearing a surgical mask, it doesn't work. If you're wearing a K95 mask, which this man might be wearing, it might work if it's fitted correctly. And the way you fit it correctly is actually a very intense process. You just don't stick it on your face and think that you're good, because that's not how an N95 mask works. So,
Ms. Brocky?
So now the CDC...
Ms. Brocky, sorry,
Yeah.
can you just finish up this 4 minutes, allow your neighbors to speak,
Sure,
and then
sure,
if
sure.
there's time,
so
thank
the
you.
CDC says, well, any mask is better than no mask. at what cost to our children is any mask better than no mask? I can do a little bit more. Let me just talk to you about, let's just remember, I've got a son who's a junior in high school, and the last time he had a normal school year was in 8th grade. Do people realize that it's been that long? I've got more to say, but I will give up the podium. Hopefully I can talk later.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jean-Claude Santini. I'm a parent of 2 children in the school district and a former Syosset high school, elementary, middle school student as well. Which is something I want to talk about briefly. I had prepared a lot to speak to you about, just like many of the parents here, and kind of reiterate exactly what you're hearing them say. But I wanted to, start off just by kind of commenting. The purpose for me coming here was to, this evening was to kind of discuss, and I feel like I'm under duress to be here. Actually, was to present my arguments and listen to the different topics that was supposed to be presented on the agenda. And I have to tell you, to be honest, it was not my intention to undermine your process at all, and I apologize profusely, because I think that was something I was compelled to do, because it really doesn't feel very free. I'd like to agree for what you were saying, that this is an area, what I'm so used to having an area to have space to communicate and speak. And I feel all of you are here behind us, kind of like a wedge, in a football game for the running backs back there to score. And you're in front of us trying to protect and guide us. And, in all of what we're hearing about with the pandemic, I know there's what I know, there's what I know, what I don't know, and what I don't know, what I don't know. And I know a lot of you are so much more aware of those realms and the finite details, whether it be legalities and stuff that you were mentioning specifically. But I didn't feel very free when I came in here. I had what felt like a wedge of men coming up to me, right, as I went to sit down and for my activity. So I felt it was apropos to interrupt the activity when it was discussing perhaps those gentlemen's security budget position, because, I wanted you to get an experience of what it's like to have your activity stopped and stifled as a result of somebody else just deciding that they want to do that. And it feels a little bit abusive. And it's not something that I felt like I wanted to do to be abusive, but I felt I was compelled because I was fooling myself that I couldn't listen to her. I couldn't even focus on the conversation. I was so preoccupied with the fact that I had a wedge come at me. And I was the high school captain of the varsity football team, and I was the wedge breaker for all 4 years, as well as when I was in middle school. So I break wedges. I'm not here to break this wedge. I'm not here to break that wedge. All right? I'm here to have my words spoken and get you guys to understand that the feelings of everything we're talking about has to be listened to and maybe can be adhered to because of the facts and the legalities that you have to follow through with. But with that said, I'm going to continue to what I wanted to talk about. Okay? So, and if it ends up stopping, the ultimate goal and the broad scope of my communication this evening is to demand that this board immediately take opposition to amendment of Section 2.60 of the Title 10 NYCRR and repeal of Subpart 66-3 of Title 10 NYCRR, face covering for COVID-19 prevention, and allow for all Syosset students to mask optionally. I would also like to know who bonds the Board of Ed members. During the September 13th Board of Ed meeting, and I know I've seen a lot of this stuff glamorized recently. I'll tell you, to be honest, I'll go on a tangent, because, as a parent, I haven't really done a lot for my kid going to board meetings. You might have seen my face twice, so I'm guilty for not contributing and being present the way I should in all facets of what they have to deal with. So it's interesting when you're cornered like this, how all of a sudden it activates you to recognize that you have power and that you have to do something to help, and that you should have been doing that before. So, as I'm standing here, I just, it's not my interest to be like a lot of the glamorous visuals online of boards and parents fighting. That's not something that I'm interested in. Okay, maybe people are. It seems sometimes interesting and funny, but that's not funny. So again, during the 13th Board of Ed meeting that you guys had in 2021, the Every Student to Succeed Act Part A funds and federal and state coronavirus funds were addressed. as ESSA is a federal education law that outlines and specifies how states and schools can use federal grant money to support school district programs and students in need. ESSA emphasizes equity in education for all students and expands measures for school accountability and student success. To my best assertion, this district ascertained the following amount in relief funds, and I may be wrong, related to COVID. $222,165 under the CARES Act ESSER 1 and GEAR funds, $663,984 under the CRRSA Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act 2021, and $1,491,213 under the American Rescue Plan Act 2021 ARP Act. It is in this interest of this community that these funds be further reviewed in an audit to make transparent to the parents what these funds were used for. And I don't assert that you are not going to do what exactly is best for our kids. That's not what I'm asserting in anything that you do. Okay? Because I do believe in what you are all here for is to advocate for our children's success, because their success reflects on your success.
Mr. Santini?
I will stop.
Thanks.
Hello, I'm Gina Luciano, and I'm an alumni as well to the Syosset Central School District. A little bit about what's going on tonight. First of all, I did not have a chance to revise things that were already said, so you might be hearing some repetitive information here. The past 2 years have been trying on all of us, but the importance to be recognized is that we are not where we were in the beginning of this pandemic. I would like to applaud the district and the faculty, the staff, and the parents on an amazing job in keeping our children safe by following the protocols that were presented to us at the time needed. We are not in that same position anymore. First, our numbers in the state have gone down significantly, and that is a victory within itself. As of today's statistics, Dr. Rogers, I'm not going to challenge your numbers. My numbers came up a little bit different, but the roundabout of new cases was 396 in Nassau County when we have a residency of 1.3 million. That's a super low number. And again, I'm looking at it as a positive and another victory. So what we have noticed and learned by staying involved in understanding the virus is that the science and the data, it has become a seasonal and has found its way into more flu-like symptoms with this new Omicron. I do understand that there are immune-compromised children, so there will always be a reason for concern. I like to share light to those parents. Please understand that this has formed itself, like I just said, into a flu-like illness, and we have been able to nurse our children back to health by doing those home remedies, the soup, the hydration. You know, we know how to nurse these children back. If masking your children is what you feel you want to do going forward, that is your decision. I will not pass judgment. I am ready for the mask to come off my children. Me personally, I think it's for the betterment of them. And also, I do want to touch on upcoming talk of vaccine mandates. Okay, we know the survival rate for the children is 99.98%. And right now we have a vaccine that covers variants that have been eradicated. So I'm not willing to vaccinate my child to something that's not going to protect them. So the good news is, at least we are past that deadly variant that we started with. This is no longer foreign to our bodies. Some of us went out, we got vaxxed. By the way, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. But we went out, we got vaxxed, and we even got Omicron. So if you were looking for a booster, there it is. Speaking back on the children again, I would like to quote Dr. Robert Malone, the creator of the mRNA and DNA vaccine technology. His quote goes as follows: "In my opinion, our public policies advantaging this has had particularly strong adverse effect on our children. Vaccine mandates for our children are completely unjustified for our children," end quote. At this point, I'm sure most of us in this room have attended an event, an evening dinner out with friends and family, where we are not wearing a mask, and maybe we're out 2 to 3 hours, maybe even longer. I'd like to note to everybody a little bit of humor, but not at the same time. The coronavirus does not have an altitude limit, so when you sit down, it's not hanging out up here saying that I can't be a host to you because you're sitting. Anyway, I'm going to finish this up, but I'm proposing that, at this point, we're getting closer to an endemic. Can we at least start to use that verbiage? We've done well with this. We have therapeutics. We have ways to get over it. And most of all, we have a current variant that is not awful. I'm proposing the right to choose whether or not your child is vaccinated, and also the right to choose mask being optional. Thank you, everybody. Let's please stop playing politics with our children's lives and take back our parental rights in decision making. Based on the evidence I have discussed tonight, I hope the Syosset Central School District understands our parental rights and agrees to vote in favor of choice, not mandates, therefore resulting in a more normalized future for our children. And best of all, don't worry, I'm done. And best of all, being on the winning side of history. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Shadon Gaddis. I have 2 children in the Syosset District. I'm here in opposition to the ongoing mask mandate and any other mandates that the school board wishes to implement in regard to our children's mental, physical, and spiritual health. I just figured I'd mention that I am a physical therapist and a former professor at Adelphi University. I was responsible for educating nursing students on the principles of disease and pathophysiology. I took a particular interest in immunology and have always been fascinated at how truly complex it is. Through my studies and ongoing research, I've come to realize that when it comes to immunity, less is more. Less pharmaceuticals, less inflammatory foods, less stress, less toxins. Natural immunity has always trumped artificial immunity. 70% of your immune cells live in the intestinal lining. NPR recently reported that one of the risk factors for long COVID is dysbiosis of the gut flora. In patients with chronic pain, the immune system is particularly vulnerable when the person has too much emotional stress or whose diet is rich in inflammatory foods. So much so that MDs treat patients with chronic pain with Wellbutrin and Prozac, and it helps. Reducing the emotional stress reduces the pain. Our children will internalize this pain. It will linger with them for years to come and only manifest itself as chronic pain in their 50s, potentially. Whether you perceive it as such, masking the kids is a stressor. I have heard from friends and my children and children of my own complain of daily abdominal pain and headaches. It's obviously difficult to correlate mask wearing in the absence of other symptoms, but it does make sense. Forcing kids who have a 99.98 survival rate from COVID to wear masks all day is causing them to lose out on their education, their sanity, and their social skills. So far, the only thing that these kids have learned in almost 3 years with COVID is don't get COVID. I'm extremely disappointed with the school health education department. Most children in school have no idea that food can affect their mood, their well-being, and their ability to fight off viruses. Prioritizing sleep as a way to keep our bodies strong, spoken about very little. The only thing that this district has managed to teach my kids about this virus is that it's deadly and you have to keep your mask on. We are lying to them. We aren't telling them the full story when it comes to health. On top of that, we created so much anxiety, depression, and stress-related illness in these children that the suicide rate has increased substantially. I'm extremely disappointed in Syosset. I came here for the best education for my kids, and what I got was a lot of unnecessary and harmful rules that last much longer than needed. Because it seems that some are not willing to stand up for our children's rights. You aren't teaching them that fear is only in their mind. No, you're teaching them that fear is what you feel when the thought of getting sick comes across your mind and you must hide from it. You're teaching them that even the most minute risk is not worth taking. You should be fostering clinical thinking skills, not that the most morally superior award goes to the kid who wears the mask properly all day or even wears 2 or 3. You're teaching them that their mental health comes second to making triple vaccinated adults feel safe. You're pushing your irrational fears on these kids and causing them anxiety, depression, and increased suicide rate. We should be empowering our children to become resilient in the face of adversity, not hide their face from it. Resilience comes from taking ownership of their health. You can minimize illness with the right diet, supplements, good sleep, exercise. Vaccines and masks are not the only way to stay healthy. I would argue that they do the opposite. What you will be left with after the dust settles is a generation of children who are too afraid to run for the board, speak up for an injustice, follow their dreams if the dream is too risky. We won't have any leaders. I'm very disappointed. I know you can do better. We have to do better. This has to end. And I, for one, will hold all of you accountable. You have my kids all day. You're not teaching appropriate life skills, in my opinion, and I think we've all had enough. So no masks, no mandates. That's my recommendation. Thank you.
Hi, good evening to all of you. My name is Tanya Getz. I have one graduate of Syosset High School last year. She's now a freshman in college. I have an 8th grader, and my husband is a 1976 graduate, and my brother-in-law is a 1983 graduate of Syosset. Okay, so I want to bring up not the issue that so many people are, although I came here for something else. But who knew? But I will say this, though, to give some, I don't know, a little personal perspective. I heard about a pandemic long before this one from my grandmother, who was born in the 1800s and who survived the first pandemic, the Spanish flu, and in fact had her first child. And my father, who was born in 1992 and survived World War II, although his elder brother, who was born in the pandemic, did not, in the Royal Canadian Air Force. But my father really impressed upon us as children resiliency in the face of various world events that can come at you quite hard. He never anticipated in high school having Hitler invade and the British Empire having to go to war. He was in British Guyana. And listening to London being bombed, having his elder brother participate in the flights over, and himself joining World War II. And so I understand that, you know, life events can hit you, and my daughter was part of a cohort in high school that had her junior year very disrupted by the pandemic, and her senior year as well. And so, you know, it's tough. And I also understand that you're not responsible for the mask mandates. That is a state law. And so that they cannot unmask our children, and that I remember well the 1970 seatbelt controversy. And because I was, you know, in school at that time, and how people fought it tooth and nail as it's an individual right to wear our seatbelt. Also, remember my mother, who is, you know, remembers the polio vaccine and that mandate. So I think what I can say here is that it's definitely been a difficult time, right? And so, and I will highlight in the Wall Street Journal recently that, and I'm going to read from it, in 2019, 18.8% of high school students said they seriously considered attempting suicide, while 15.7% made a suicide plan and 8.9% made an attempt, according to a separate CDC survey. Okay. By comparison, 13.8% of high schoolers reported considering suicide attempts in 2009. Now, it's quite true, in June 2020 survey, 25.5% of 18 to 24-year-olds said they had seriously considered suicide during the last 30 days. And that was obviously just after the pandemic had hit. And those numbers have gone up. And when last I spoke to the board, it was about the later school start time in the high school, because I feel it's so imperative for the health of our children. And the CDC mentions as lack of sleep, the 3 key symptoms that that come from lack of sleep are suffer from symptoms of depression, perform poorly in school, and engage in unhealthy risk behaviors such as drinking. So when I last asked this, and if I could just have a little more time, I know, Dr. Rogers, you said the numbers weren't there, which is what the CDC says. Any parent who's advocating for later sleep times will say it's the late buses, we can't afford it. I understand that constraint. And what I'm asking for you, though, is to look at other ways of adding an extra sleep, such as when I looked at the high school extra help time and your honors geometry class, where it's one of your quote-unquote toughest courses, has no after-school health sessions. And your extra help sessions in the high school begin at 6:50. That is too early. And I'm going to drop it here. I'm going to try to come back for another follow-up, but that's okay.
Good evening. My name is Yao Xiao, and I'm a Chinese immigrant, first generation. I have two kids attending Robinson Elementary School. One is first grade, the other one is fourth grade. Okay, here's a little background about my history. My background. I was Wuhan, which is the original of this pandemic, is my second hometown. I spent about 10 years in that city. So I'm quite familiar with that city. I have friends in that city. And I was know about pandemic, this coronavirus stuff being early than most of the people in here. Okay? I lost my friend's family during this pandemic in 2019 and 2020. But I see more tragedy which is being caused by lockdown during the pandemic. Child literally get starved starved to death at home, and elder people cannot get medical treated due to cannot get past all kind of PCR test. They literally died at home. They caused more damage to their home. The reason when I knew the news, the reason I was getting really scared of, and by the way, my parents' home got locked down for 4 months at the first wave. I was scared to death because I have the very clear memory about SARS during 2002, 2009, 2003. SARS, which has about 10% fatality, and the coronavirus, because they are on the same group, so we thought maybe another SARS come from. We are very scared. But right now, everything is clear. Everyone can see the statistics numbers. The fatality number across the age is less than 1%. For kids, it's almost 0. So I do not see any reason we should keep this mask mandatory for our kids That's my first opinion. Second opinion is, cause this pandemic things, I see so many infringe of right from our government. Government should act during the pandemic, but lockdown and mask mandatory is not the answer. It's just power grabbing, okay? It's just a logical slip slope to infringe our personal right. Okay. So even it's SARS, I strongly against to do mandatory mask or do a kind of other vaccine mandatory. Then come to my actual question to Dr. Rogers. According to a report by New York Post on December 17, 2021, Governor Hochul wants to mandatory COVID-19 vaccine for school-age kids by fall 2022, which is 6 months away, pending legislation approval. At the last of the latest status, both Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 vaccine approved by FDA on EUA, which is emergency use authorization, which means both companies were not being held accountable for side effects caused by their vaccine. New York government won't compensate for any damage either. A vaccine mandatory without accountability is irresponsible and unfair for consumer. So I will not go down the statistic number and the medical reason. My question is, do you support vaccine mandatory for school kids? I'm asked, do you support vaccine? I'm asking this question in terms of the morality, not legitimacy. So please don't reflect my question using state law or government executive order. Slavery was legal before 1968. Free slavery was being criminalized. Racial segregation was legal before 1956. Protesting racism was being criminalized. Holocaust was legal in Nazi Germany. Hiding Jews was being criminalized. Legitimacy is not the guide of the morality. A simple yes or no is sufficient for me. If you do not support it, what are you going to do? That's all.
Mr. Shia,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Hello. Christine Henner. I have 3 kids in Syosset schools, 1 in HBT and 2 in South Grove. So these children are our future, and to quote Nelson Mandela, there can be no keener revelation of society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. We have complied with the rules. We have worn the masks. We have socially distanced. We have quarantined. We went virtual, everything, right? And now it's time to return to normal. Our younger children have missed out on so many things these past 2 years that our older children had the opportunity to experience. The field trips, the in-person parties, the dances, the in-person mystery readers at the elementary schools, the in-person spectators for games, concert, plays. Even after-school clubs became virtual. Cooking clubs became virtual. These social activities, these learning experiences, is what shapes our children's personalities and who they are going to become. In the beginning, at the start of this pandemic, I can understand the knee-jerk reaction that we had because we didn't know what to expect from this novel virus. After 2 years, with more and more data coming out, it doesn't take much to realize that we need course correct. The masks do not provide the benefit that we initially thought they would. The effectiveness of these masks are being shown to be far less than we thought to expect them to be, but the damage that it's causing to our children as a result is something that we need to address. Young children are showing signs of speech impediments because they can't see the facial expressions of someone talking to them, chronic headaches and dizziness due to prolonged hours wearing the mask, increased anxiety and depression amongst our children. A major part of a child's social development has to do with learning nonverbal communication, which you are depriving our children of. There are also the intangible side effects that have yet to be discovered. Years from now, we will look back and realize the harm that we caused to our children. Now, I understand there are some people that feel we should be vaccinated and boosted, masked, remote, isolated, but I am not one of those people. I choose, thank you, I choose not to live my life in fear because that's not really living. I have friends that are teachers in many different districts, including right here in Syosset, and they feel the same as I do. One day when the kids did go maskless, one of the most positive and emotional days many children and teachers experienced, as it was a day that it could be a smile, could be seen from ear to ear. It had been 2 years since that has happened. Our kids had not even seen. It is the school's responsibility to provide a quality education. After all, that's what we're paying these taxes for, right? It is the school's responsibility that no child be discriminated against, bullied, or pressured, whether masked or unmasked, by the students or teachers. Because I know. When the state lifts the mask mandate, I am not going to ask permission, and I am not going to ask for forgiveness. My children will come unmasked to school, and they will get an education.
Hi, my name's Teresa Morelli. I have 2 kids in the district and owned a house here for almost 15 years. I wanted to actually also comment on one of the board members' recognition that, you know, here in our country, it's different than other parts of the world where we have this freedom to make choices and come here together and express ourselves. And I just wanted to remind everybody of where those freedoms come from. We have God-given inalienable rights, and they are protected by the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. You know, the Constitution is there to basically protect us from government overreach. I know all of you up there, most of you up there, not all, but most of you have taken an oath to that U.S. Constitution as part of your volunteer work. So I thank you for that. There are 5 federal laws and about at least 16 New York State laws that I can think of that really by enforcing an unenforceable and illegal regulation, our district is in violation of those. Judge, the Supreme Court Judge, Nedemaker, I'm blanking because of nervousness. Nedemaker, he put it eloquently in his decision. He wrote it out, or his law clerk wrote it out, basically explaining to us. You know, maybe some of us were a little duped, but basically explaining why it was illegal, why it's unenforceable, that 10 NYCRR 2.60. It was never really enforceable. Just because you say it's true doesn't make it true. It was always a false emergency regulation, at least since March 2021, March 5th, 2021, when the New York legislature said Cuomo and any of his predecessors or future governors cannot make laws through regulation, or any of their agencies can't do that. You can make a law through the proper channels. You can use the legislature and, you know, introduce a law, introduce a bill, and your regulations can derive out of those existing laws, but we all should have known that. We have a U.S. Constitution that's being violated, First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, U.S. Title 42, U.S. Title 52. We have a New York Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, 3, and 8. We have a New York State Office of the Professional Code, 6522. These are some of the laws that we should all be familiar with. These are where our freedoms and our freedom to gather here, our freedom to speak, our freedom to bodily autonomy. Our children actually have those God-given inalienable rights. The masks that we're putting on them, the masks that they've been forced to wear are actually EUA devices, just like the vaccine. Most of the vaccines for COVID, they're also emergency use authorized. These measures were, implemented, probably in some cases, a lot of cases, with good intentions, right? But anytime we have an EUA medical device or medical product, something comes along with it. It's called informed consent. It's required for all medical therapies, all medical devices. And when you're using a face mask as a mitigating measure, that is a medical device. Anytime you use something like that for mitigation purposes, it's a medical device. So I think we just need to keep these things in mind. The right to avoid the imposition of human experimentation with emergency use authorized devices and medical products, that's something that's been sacred in our nation. I know, it may have felt justified because of the situation. We were in an emergency. But even the state, in their response to the petitioners in that Supreme Court case, they admitted, yeah, we're not in an emergency. Yeah, we know that. November 26th, I think there was a new emergency mentioned. But even the state, they even admitted it. We're not in an emergency. So how can we continue to use these EUA masks in a forced manner if we're not in a state of emergency? I'm here to just reiterate. I'm just here to say, once again, I'm here for parental rights to be restored. I think I always respect everybody's choices, what they do with their body. If you want to use a mask or if you think that's best for your family, maybe you live in a multi-generational family household and you believe it's in your family's best interest to put one mask or two masks on your child, do that. You feel it's best to give your child, you've weighed all the risks and the benefits of the EUA vaccines. You feel it's best to give your child that vaccine, do that. Just respect if there's somebody else who doesn't want to do that. And your mask should protect you. And we just like Shani Park said, we need to show respect to each other and come together. And I think we can.
Thank you, Ms. Morelli. I appreciate it. All right, we're gonna take one more speaker, and then we're gonna have to close the audience to the public so that we have time to respond to our speakers, and we have still our A, B, and C items to go. So thank you, and obviously we invite you back to the next meeting if you haven't had the opportunity to share what you want to in public, and also you can write to the board. Thank you. This is the last one.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me an opportunity to speak on behalf of my family, our experiences throughout the pandemic, and our experiences with Syosset School District. My name is Yolanda Vazolo. I have one child in first grade here at Willits, and I will have an incoming kindergartner in September. I have been involved in education for over 20 years. In fall of 2020, our older son started kindergarten. We know how important kindergarten is. There's a famous book titled, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, among of many other poems and essays on the topic. They include things on cooperation, social skills, and all the good stuff of fair play. But my child and children who have been in kindergarten over the past 3 years did not learn all of that. They've been masked, isolated, living on the islands of their desks, struggling to see, hear the teachers in the room. Not allowed to make eye contact with their neighbors, they are trying to learn to read and write without being able to use all of their senses. It's almost like trying to place an order at a drive-thru or understand the subway conductors for these early readers. As our children are left to feel alone in classrooms, sorting out emotions, both happy and sad, by themselves behind their masks, they are losing so many of those special lessons that are meant to be learned in those early years, especially kindergarten. They are losing those social skills on how to respond to each other when they have different opinions and emotions. The visual cues are masked, quite literally, in addition to being removed from each other. Learning how to share, get along, and the art of compromise have been left to the wayside. The only social interactions our children have are on the days they are lucky enough to have recess or physical education, and even this is questionable. The ideas of playing fair, learning about personal self-space, and respectfully working in a group are being hidden behind masks from their islands and through their computer screens. Let me ask you this. What are your memories of kindergarten? What are your fondest memories of kindergarten? Sitting at cafeteria tables, talking, playing with toys, going to physical education, playing with parachutes and beanbags, circling up with a teacher to read Dr. Seuss' book. Do you remember all the interactions, the emotions, both visual and auditory? My son was struggling to sound out words in kindergarten, and he had to stare at a word wall to try and decode it on his own instead of in a small group. Yes, the teachers are doing their best. I don't blame them. They are taking your guidance. But you have allowed this to perpetuate in our schools. You have taken your authority and put it to the wayside for what is easy instead of what is right and best for our children and our schools. We all pay some of the highest taxes, and I would have to imagine we have one of the best school districts you can find. Do you think that not allowing parents to have a voice on our children's education or their bodily autonomy is going to keep us there? All of those skills that were supposed to be learned in kindergarten are now being masked in first grade for my son as this draconian narrative continues. I am proud of my son and all of his accomplishments in spite of all the measures the district has taken to keep our children apart, socially inept, and hidden behind their masks. But in September, he will be in second grade. All of our children in this age group are reaching an important threshold for those lifelong skills that were supposed to be learned in kindergarten. Why, you might ask? Do you know anything about attitude theory? There are three main components that make up attitude theory. They are behavioral beliefs, normative, and control beliefs. Each of these areas explains how a person arrives at a feeling or understanding of what they enjoy or not, or how they should behave or not. Many of these beliefs in regards to education and social norms are set in those early years. Let me give you an example. Children by second grade or by the age of 8 need to have positive experiences in physical activity and physical education. This includes feeling and being successful and included in physical activities. In addition, children need to see both genders being physically active and physically active together. That's what Title IX protects. The research shows that if children are not exposed to a variety of physical activities and both genders participating, it will have a negative impact on their attitude towards PE and physical activity throughout their life. What we know from research is that those children who have negative attitudes and negative experiences begin to withdraw from physical activity shortly afterwards. How does this translate further? Just look at our society, the number of sedentary children, overweight or obese, and it negatively affects their self-esteem. Now, what we have seen is that they become overweight adults who have negative attitudes towards physical activity. Now that we are closing in on our second year of mandates on our children, for those whom this virus poses little to no risk, for whom losing out on the basis of education for which they are expected to grow from, what will their attitude, not only towards school and learning, but more importantly to the social and emotional aspects of being around others, learning the social cues of others' emotions and how to be empathetic towards each other. This needs to end now so that we can help our children grow and thrive, positively impact their attitudes towards being around each other, helping them understand the various social cues through facial expressions to practice those kindergarten skills of sharing, cooperation, play, and experimenting. Now, I can't even imagine what parents are feeling like with middle and high schoolers at this point. These formidable years where they are building those social skills in preparation for college and being independent adults. But instead, masking and this isolation has created an increase in students doing harm, physical harm, mental, and emotional distress.
Ms. Mazzillo?
Yes.
Thank you. Could you just end with a sentence? And I don't want to cut you off but it's time.
What I ask of you is to think about our children and what's in their best interest. their best interest for having positive experiences in school, and how this will lead them to be better throughout their lives.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sabina Chaikin. I moved to this district 7 months ago. My husband went to elementary school here and loved the district, and that is actually why we decided to move here and nowhere else on Long Island, and decided to pay some of the highest taxes. I'd like to first start by saying that I am extremely sensitive to the last 2 years and what this pandemic has done to us. We were in no way, shape prepared. The entire world was not prepared, and in no way, shape, or form am I diminishing the hardships that some families went through and the loss of life. But we are not where we were 2 years ago. We are not where we were a year ago. We are in a different place. We know how to mitigate this virus, and we know how to prevent it. And we know it is not killing as many people as it was, because we know what to do now. And as the months and years go on, we will continue to know what to do, and more science and research will emerge. With that said, I want to explain to you that my family came from Russia, from a communist, government-controlled world, that this gentleman here, I believe from China, was also trying to explain, that we are here because we want to be free. We want to have our freedom of speech, we want to be listened to, and we want the Constitution to be upheld. And we want our children to have a healthy future. That's all what we want. I'm hoping that all of you here are here because that's what you want for our children. We have lost our logical reasoning. We have to stop the insanity. We have to stop this fear-driven of, oh my God, the next variant. It will come. We know it will come. And we need to be prepared. We need to do things like, I'm sorry, I'm not wearing my glasses, so I don't know your last name, but Anna said we need to be prepared. Before I go into what my recommendation is for preparing, I would like to tell you that I'm a non-practicing child psychologist. And I study child development very closely. And these masks are hindering our children's both verbal and nonverbal development. I'm not going into stats. I didn't write anything. I really wanted to come here and listen for the first time of my residence here in Syosset. My child is in kindergarten. He complains of headaches every day. He comes home and I ask him, how was school today? And he goes, Mommy, I had a really bad headache and I couldn't breathe. And I wanted to go to the nurse and I wasn't allowed. My heart is breaking, not just for my child, but for the other children that our parents are here and are not here. And if any of you have children or had children, I want you to really think hard how they would or are feeling. Our children cannot verbalize their fear or their emotions. We have to take control and make sure they are safe. And these masks are not making them safe. Dr. Rogers, I appreciate your studies, and I'm really curious where you received those numbers from. I can tell you some numbers. There is a Chinese study that evaluated 50 out of 56 masks. They found that they have extremely high levels of platelets that contain carcinogens. Carcinogens like in smoke, tobacco smoke, or vape, or barbecue smoke, or inhaling smoke in a fire. Do you want to be responsible for the demise of our children's health? I do not ever want to feel that my child's health and safety was in the hands of someone other than the parents. I want to ask you, and I really just need 1 minute more. How many of you have gone to a restaurant, a sports game, arena, concert, gathered with family, and then come to school and take off the masks? I cannot tell you how many times I come up to the school to drop off lunch for my children, and I see inside teachers not wearing masks. Why? If you're so afraid of the children, why? What's going on? Why is there this double standard? This has to stop. Either put them on or take them off, but don't pick and choose, please.
Ms. Sabina?
I'm sorry, I have a recommendation for you as a school and as a district, and that is because I've worked in the medical field for 22 years with double and triple board certified surgeons. If you want to truly make the air safer in the school, and we pay lots of taxes, please invest in UV HVAC systems. They are between $249 to $2,400 depending on the square footage. They kill 97% of airborne viruses, including COVID-19. It has been studied in other countries and it works. It works better than the masks. Please look into that because I'm sure everybody here will invest $249, okay? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and that concludes audience to the public. We will now endeavor to answer some of your questions.
All right. Some of this is thematic. Some of this I'll try and go in order. Ms. Rogliano, you had questions about how the spring differs from the fall when we were in the Delta surge. So what I've said all along, and we've said at these meetings, is we've been methodically adding back things and then waiting to see what happens before we take another step. So last fall, we made a bunch of really, what I think are very muscular decisions to add things back. For example, we doubled the number of kids at the high school. Second, we removed the ability for anyone who is uncomfortable being in school to learn remotely. So all schools were back to full strength. We moved kids from being 6 feet apart to being 3 feet apart. We went to 9 period days at the middle schools. The middle schools eliminated the cohort model and started rotating through classes again. So elementary schools back to 3 feet and eliminated the remote option. So we made a lot of really muscular changes, and at that time what we were trying to do was digest those changes and see if they elevated risk, see if they resulted in more transmission. Obviously they didn't, but at the same time that's when the Delta variant really took off. We didn't know what to expect from the Delta variant. We had not seen any evidence of outdoor transmission until this fall. And then we did have a situation where we saw the only explanation for what we saw could have been outdoor transmission. So that obviously caused us to put the brakes on a little bit because we didn't want to see that continue. So that's the difference between the fall and the spring. To the many speakers who said the situation now is different than it was a year ago, I agree, and that was what I think at least half a dozen of my slides tonight were dedicated to, is illustrating the contrast between where we were going into spring of 21 and where we are now going into spring of 22. So with the basketball games, as I mentioned, we've done work with the HVAC system in the high school gym. I think it'll be possible to have more people in there. I know it'll be possible to have more people in there. The questions about the high school musical, I don't know where that number came from. Obviously, I don't read every piece of paper here, but I'll certainly look into it and see how that was calculated. But there are multiple presentations of the musical, so I'm sure it's multiplied by the number of times that the musical is being put on. So, okay. Let me go through the questions I have. So we certainly want to see more parental involvement. As I mentioned earlier and in response to Mr. Greco's questions, We're working right now. We had a meeting with the elementary principals again last week to try and put some finishing touches on the ideas for the things that we're going to do at the elementary schools. So I'll just go through a lot of the thematic themes because a lot of the themes were repeated again and with slightly different framings. But the bottom line is there's a question about masks. Do they or don't they work? So I don't see the point. In the end, it will be possible to find research that supports whatever your view is on that. Where we are right now is that they are mandated by the state. So you have one Supreme Court justice that thinks that mandate is not constitutional. You have a different Supreme Court justice that thinks it is constitutional. And right now, the next level up is deciding between the two of them. They're going to have to work it out. And then we'll know what rules apply to school districts. Several speakers spoke about vaccine mandates and asked that the board not put a vaccine mandate into place. So just to be clear, the board does not have the power or the authority to implement a vaccine mandate. Those can only be mandated through something called state police powers, and those powers can only be exercised by the state itself. So that will not be a choice that falls to the board because it's not a power that is within their grasp. Then a number of speakers talked about the recovery rate from COVID and specifically the recovery rate for students. And I think we're all grateful, and certainly for me, as someone who's responsible for the lives of over 8,000 people, I'm so relieved that this has not been as significant for young people as it has been for the population generally. But the risk is not zero. And the challenging question to wrestle with is how much risk is acceptable? And that's what this whole conversation has been about, is how much risk is acceptable. So all of the work that we've done over the last 2 years has been an attempt to try to mitigate risk. And obviously, if we move into a phase where the virus is considered to be endemic, we're going to be deciding to live with risk. So that's a shift, but that's a shift that I think we need guidance on because I certainly don't feel like I can balance the consequences of those risks because the consequences could be severe. Okay.
Keep going.
So, it's okay. Listen.
Okay, listen. We closed audience to the public, but we are endeavoring to answer your questions. To the extent that you have any further questions, definitely come back next month, and ask the questions then, or you can certainly email them. But at this point, we're doing our best to answer the questions.
So I'm just going to say that there are a number of different risks. The risk of getting sick, the risk of potentially having... Come on.
Listen, it's not. Instead of answering the questions, we're going to wind up continuing with the meeting. We do want to answer your questions, but you have to allow us the time to do that. Thank you.
So there are risks, obviously, of death. There are risks of getting long COVID. There are risks of getting MISC-C. There are risks from having this disease, but it also is, I think, apparent that we're not going to have zero COVID. So the question is how to balance those risks, and Obviously, there are strong opinions about how to do that. Then lastly, the suggestion on ultraviolet heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. We do have HEPA filtration in the classrooms at the high school, and the elementary schools all have MERV 13 filters, and we put in ventilation systems. The UV systems are not permitted in New York State for schools. So we did look into those, but they're not allowed by the state education department, so it's not an option for us.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rogers. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. Dr. Rogers had already mentioned that there are a couple of issues that were mentioned at audience to the public that the board doesn't have control over. One of them is vaccine mandates, and the other is mask mandates. And with respect to compliance, I know that there was a suggestion from at least one person that we simply not comply, and we're not entitled to do that. So we take oaths when we become trustees to uphold the law. We don't have a choice but that. Now, we were asked whether we would advocate on issues like vaccines and issues like masks. And so while I would never get ahead of the board on issues like that, I would share how in the past the board has approached advocacy issues to our legislators. So when we've elected to take an advocacy position in the past to our governmental officials, the position has always been one that would be universally beneficial for the entire district. In other words, issues that would not be controversial within the district, such as we advocated to the state education department for steps to mitigate the impact for state assessment tests and to mitigate against lost instructional time. We've advocated to the Nassau Industrial Development Agency to oppose pilot applications because the repeat pilot applications and their renewals negatively affect all of our taxpayers when it comes to their taxes. We advocated to a state senator for grant funds because we had facilities needs. We advocated to the Department of Environmental Conservation because there were safety concerns with various proposed projects. And again, these safety concerns would be universal. But what we haven't done to date is advocated for a position that a portion of the community would be in favor of, but not another portion of the community. And so in terms of advocating for legislation, that's not to say what we would do in the future. I'm just giving you a history of how we've approached that in the past because we were asked. And the UVA vac systems, that was the first for me. I hadn't heard of that, so thanks for that information.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Thank you, everybody who came and spoke. Listen, we want to listen to you. Believe me, we are doing everything we can on our end to support the administration. We are. We have went up and above. We have 8,000 people at the school, the students, the teachers, the staff, the administration, the custodians, the lunch people. We're concerned about everything. We speak about... The reason that all of us volunteer on the board is because we care. Okay? Now, I have a fourth grader. Every day I have the same conversation with her. I'm very stressed about how stressed she is. Believe me, I understand what you're saying. She went to high school here. She didn't have graduation. She didn't have the prom. She's in college now. They're still locked down. So this is a daily battle for me as a parent. I'm not just on the board. I'm a parent also. We are trying to do everything we can. Can we do more? Yes. Can we advocate? Absolutely. That's why we're here. We will do everything we can to keep all of our children safe within the rules that we can. And you guys know me, I've questioned everything. We speak to our attorneys. We are trying to do everything we can. Can we do more? Can we get parents in the school? We will try to do our best. I also 100% agree that the children need more sleep. The children need more activity. The children need a better diet. We absolutely agree with that. I just want to let you know. Thank you.
Susan?
Because the school is already in the works planning different things to bring the parents in and to have more in-person activities for the kids, I had a whole spiel planned about having kids more in-person events and getting parents in the building because it's so important. But since the school is already planning that stuff, do you think it would be possible, since people feel so strongly about it, that we can get an update before next month, that maybe in your Friday update or something, just because there's such an urgency to it? And just to give a little shout out, I know a lot of the elementary schools are having a Valentine's Day party next week, or for Valentine's Day. And if there's any way to figure out how to get parents into that, that would be an awesome thing. And I also want to thank the district, because I know you guys are planning and trying, and there's a lot of behind the scenes things that go on that people don't see because it's behind the scenes, but we appreciate anything you do to get us in.
Okay, thank you. Now we begin A items. A1 is the approval of staff changes. May I have a motion, please? Mr. Rotolo, seconded by Ms. Levitan. Are there any questions? I'm sorry, what? Oh, sorry. Let's just finish this vote, and then we'll go back to discussion items. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you for that reminder. Dr. Rogers, I wanted to raise Regents examinations because I know that a lot of parents were confused when they got the initial letter saying that mid-term Regents examinations were being canceled and they weren't clear on what was going to be for the end of the year. Do we know anything more now than we did when that initial letter came out as to whether the Board of Regents is going to suspend the Regents for the end of the year or maintain them?
We don't know anything more officially, but I think it's very unlikely that the Regents would suspend the examinations for the June examination period.
So at this point, we're still moving forward with the same curriculum and planning and supporting the exam should it be taken?
Yeah, our plan right now, we are anticipating the Regents exams being given as scheduled, so all of our energy is focused on preparing students to do well on those.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? The next question is about graduation. A lot of families are trying to plan, and I know we haven't set out for middle school or high school yet what the exact plans are going to be, but I know that families, if they can, will have people fly out to come see the graduations, and I was wondering where we are with the planning and when families can expect to hear the details.
Sure. So I'll start with the high school graduation, the commencement exercises. We work with Hofstra, as you know, every year. This last year, we were able to have an outdoor ceremony. I personally thought it was terrific, aided by the wonderful weather that we had. My understanding is that Hofstra is planning on moving ceremonies back indoors again, as it has in previous years. I know that there might be some interest in keeping the outdoor ceremony because obviously it was such a great experience. To do that, though, Hofstra would have to rent the stage again. That would be fairly expensive. So, one question would be, are there other districts that typically use Hofstra that might also be interested in an outdoor ceremony that could share the expense of doing that? Or if not, then it's more likely that we'll be indoors. And in terms of what the rules will be in place in June for an indoor venue, I think that's kind of anybody's guess at this point. For the middle school moving up ceremonies, again, a lot of great feedback about the outdoor ceremonies that we had last year. Whatever we do, we would like to try and get the whole graduating class together instead of doing it as two ceremonies. So a lot of our planning has been around trying to figure out how to make it possible for the whole class to graduate together, both from HBT and from Southwoods. So that's where our attention and focus has been. We're looking very seriously at an outdoor ceremony again. And so to your question about travel, if we do have outdoor ceremonies, part of the challenge for us will be to identify not just a date, but a rain date for those ceremonies. Elementary moving up, thank you. So again, we also saw a lot of really great ceremonies outdoors last year and uses of space that we hadn't anticipated using that way, but I thought worked very well. And again, a lot of schools did multiple ceremonies with, different sections graduating together. And we think that we could do something where the whole class can be graduated together. We'd prefer to do that. I think it's a nice feel for the students. It's a nice feel for the parent community. So again, we're focused on outdoor ceremonies and we're focused on trying to get everybody together if possible.
Okay, great. And if we can, talk with Hofstra and advocate for, more than 2 tickets a person, it would be helpful because I know families who had grandparents who had to, fight over which one was going to get to see their grandkid graduate, and it's not ideal. Are there any other? Yes, Susan, and then Tom.
Since the outdoor was great, I have 3 graduations this year, but is there any thought to maybe getting our own tent or outdoor facility just so that way we can accommodate all of our graduations on property, and that way we don't have to, it could be outside altogether but covered, so that way we're not at the mercy of the weather. I don't know if it's feasible and I don't know how much it would cost logistically, but just as an idea to throw out there.
In the end, the answer to this is going to be that the state education department will not allow us to have a tent of the size that you want. But actually the tents that we're allowed to have are just the ones that you've already seen on the school campuses already. I think they're 12 by 12 or 15 by 15, but they're not very large. Anything larger than that actually has to have fire suppression systems, exit lights, smoke detectors, emergency lighting, and on and on and on. So it's just not feasible.
Even if it's just a covering?
Yeah, and any sort of outdoor structure ends up being treated like a building project, and it has to go to the state. And
Hi, Dr. Arch, thank you. I agree with Tracy and also with Susan that last year's graduations, the middle school, the high school, if we can get everybody together, have them outside, it was absolutely great ceremonies that we had. Everybody was able to come. If we can get everybody together for the middle schools, then we won't need as many sections as we did last year and do the rain date. That seemed to work out really well. We did a phenomenal job with the photographers and having everybody have an intimate moment with their child. It was much more intimate than we've had in the past. So I think it was a success, and if we can just add more people and have it together and have it outside, that would be great. And elementary schools too, obviously.
Sorry, one last question for planning purposes for people. Are the dates that are on the calendar still the dates you're shooting for, or are you going to try to move them different dates if they have to be outdoors and you need to plan for rain dates?
yeah, so you read our minds. The dates on the calendar were planned as though they were going to be indoor ceremonies. So if we move outdoors, we'll have to make the first ceremony earlier so that that could be a rain date. So we're literally working on that right now, because if we're going to share the facility of the turf field, say between the 2 middle schools, then we really need 4 dates for those schools. So we're working on that right now.
Okay, that concludes discussion items, and now we move to A2, which is the approval of 2021-22 stipends and hourly rates. May I have a motion, please? Mr. Gershon, seconded by Dr. Park. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? A3 is the approval of coaching recommendations for spring of 2022. May I have a motion, please? Mr. Rotolo, seconded by Ms. Falkova. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B1 is the approval of the Committee on Special Education recommendations. May I have a motion, please? Mr. Rotolo, seconded by Mr. Greco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B2 is the approval of Committee on Preschool Special Education recommendations. Is there a motion? Mr. Greco, seconded by Ms. Falkova. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B3 is the approval of student club charters. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Koshia, seconded by Dr. Park. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B4 is the approval of scheduling a public hearing for the budget vote and election for the Syosset Central School District. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Levitan, seconded by Mr. Rotolo. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B5 is the first reading of Policy 1900, Parent and Family Engagement, 4325, Academic Intervention Services, 4327, Homebound Instruction, 4770, Graduation Requirements, 4850, Animals in the Schools. May I have a motion for the first reading? Ms. Koshia, seconded by Ms. Chang. Are there any questions? Okay, this will be voted on at the March 21st, 2022 meeting, so copies of these policies are going to be available for inspection on the website. C1 is the authorization for service contracts. May I have a motion, please? Mr. Rotolo, seconded by Mr. Greco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C2 is the authorization for special education and or nursing contracts. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Koshia, seconded by Ms. Chang. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C3 is the authorization for contracts for federal Part B funds. May I have a motion, please? Mr. Rotolo, seconded by Mr. Greco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C4 is the authorization to reject a bid. May I have a motion, please? Dr. Park, seconded by Ms. Koshia. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C5 is the authorization for piggybacking. May I have a motion, please? Mr. Rotolo, seconded by Ms. Levitan. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C6 is the authorization of the disposal of broken, surplus, and or obsolete equipment and or books. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Koshia, seconded by Dr. Park. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C7 and 8 can be taken together. They are the authorization for change orders. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Falco, seconded by Mr. Rotolo. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C9 is the authorization for deduct change orders. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Chang, seconded by Dr. Park. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C10 through 12 can be taken together. They are the acceptance of donations of funds. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Falco, seconded by Mr. Rotolo. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you, everybody. Motion to adjourn. Yes. Oh.
I'm sorry, I just wasn't sure if it should be done before or after new business, but I'd like to make a motion to draft a letter to the governor requesting metrics and timeline, whichever way we could carefully word it, and I don't think we should wait a month on something like this. Anyone else?
Is there a second to that motion? Lisa Koshia. Are there any questions? Susan.
Can you specify a little bit about... Sorry. Can you just specify a little more about what you want to see in the letter?
Carefully worded letter requesting specific metrics, just like the ones we used to look at with the previous governor, and the timeline. If New Jersey has their March 7th, we would like to see at least movement towards, guidelines, metrics, numbers, a little bit more, guidance from the state.
Ooh, sorry. My question just to the board is, has everybody read the superintendent's letter that we're talking about? Because if you don't know what the letter is, I would move to table it. But if you have read it and everybody can have a conversation about it, then great. Brian.
Would it be helpful, since obviously this is the letter I was talking about earlier, if I read 3 of the sentences that I flagged? And it's the reason I brought this up. I mean, this is a letter to Mary Bassett, the Department of Health. It's not directed to the governor, but I think that's a different issue. But it says, we believe we have now reached the time where the state needs to transition schools out from a pandemic learning environment. It later says the critical issue with mandatory masking in schools at this moment is the urgent need for school leaders and parents to know the plan moving forward with concrete assurances from the state. And then the last sentence I'll read it states, the state should provide clear guidance on universal school mask requirements and when and how those will evolve. The best way to do this is to provide reasonable, understandable, and achievable metrics based on recommendations from medical professionals for when masking rulings will eventually be changed. I think something along those lines is what I was getting at earlier.
Okay, so I understand your point, so I just want to kind of reflect back so everybody is on the same page with what you both are asking for, and Anna especially because you made the motion. The letter that you're proposing is for clarification on what criteria they're using to determine ultimately when the mandate should be ended, but to not offer any opinion or advocate for a position, mask or no mask. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was talking about.
So there's been a motion and a second and questions. Anybody else?
I have a question. I guess my understanding of what Dr. Rogers was saying was it wasn't just isolated to the masking, it was all of the procedures that we would need to put in place for it to be safe, correct? Distancing and all the other mitigating factors and the layering, not just one thing.
Right. We have a series of layered mitigation strategies in place right now. What the superintendent's letter, and I don't have it memorized, but what they're asking the state for is the criteria that the state are using to make decisions, and asking for the state to reveal that so that we can watch the data and the metrics evolve in real time towards that criteria that they've established. So I do believe that in Massachusetts, it's beyond just whether the mask as a mitigating strategy is going to be removed, but it's about what kinds of mitigation strategies are in place at what levels of transmission.
Okay, I think we should have that. Okay. More conclusion, more in totality, not just one thing.
Right, it's to set expectations and to make sure that people can
And have a roadmap.
see where they're going. Right. Okay, understood. Everybody understand? Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. I didn't count. Yeah.
Will we be able to send the letter to the public when we're done to show that we, what we were asking and what the letter was, or is that not something we can do? Could we share the letter with the public?
Whenever we've advocated to any official, we've always posted it on the website, and that's what we would do. And on many occasions, Dr. Rogers will also put a link in an email update so that people can get it.
Thank you.
Okay, are we concluded? Great. Adjourned.